Right, good evening everyone. Welcome to tonight's Rushcliffe Borough Council planning meeting. Welcome along to our members of the public as well. Before we start the meeting, I think because we've got the visitors here, we better have a health and safety escape advice, please. Is yours working or shall I?
No, I'm on. Thank you, Jim. Yes, Jim, we're not expecting the fire alarm to sound this evening, so if it does sound, there's two options. We either go out through the foyer area to the concourse area at the front, otherwise it's through the two sets of double doors at the rear, turn left, out the side door, and then we congregate in the back left-hand corner of the car park. Thank you.
Thank you, or just follow us.
Yeah.
So we'll get into the start of the meeting then. Do we have any apologies for absence and or substitute members, please?
Apologies from Councillor Murray, substitute as Councillor Begum.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't.
Apologies from Councillor Murray, substitute as Councillor Begum.
Right. Councillor Bigham, yes, right. Welcome. Is this your first planning meet? No, it's my second. Oh, right. Well, welcome. Oh, right. Okay. Well, thank you. So, do we have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code, please? Anything to declare? Thank you very much, and indeed, so am I. Councillor Healy and myself will be leaving the meeting for the first item. We'll be staying in the room because we're ward members, and under the new way of working, ward members have to stand down from committee, so thank you for that. Right, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of January. Those of us who are here, are we happy that those are correct? Happy for me to sign them? Thank you. It's the 13th, isn't it? Right, so we will now go into our first of our planning applications this evening, and as mentioned, my Vice Chairman, Councillor Stockwood, will lead on this because I have to stand down momentarily. So just make sure I've got all my bits and pieces. There we are. Councillor Stockwood, thank you.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda this evening is the Cotgrave Shopping Centre, Candleby Lane, Cotgrave. And Mr. Pegram, could you take us through the slides, please?
Thank you, Vice Chairman. So, as you say, the application relates to the shopping centre at Cotgrave. Members will be familiar with the site and will be aware that this site has been the subject of improvement and regeneration. These shop units here have all been refurbished and alterations carried out to the exterior, and there's the multi-service centre over on the eastern side of the site, which is now open. The application before you this evening relates to the western side of the site, which is the area I'm outlining there, and is for a terrace of 3 shops with the access of Candleby Lane and a reconfiguration of the car parking area in this area. The previous buildings that occupied this site have now been demolished, so you'll see in this aerial photograph, you can see the existing or the previous building that occupied the site, and again just outlining the area which is the subject of the application. So again, just looking from Candleby Lane now, this is looking up towards the site. You can see the refurbished shops just in that point of the shot, and the area concerned is behind the play area here. So looking up now at the area that's fenced off, so it's in this area here where it's proposed to build the terrace of 4 shops. That's looking back the other way, the existing access point there, and the end of the refurbished shops you can see there. Just a shot down Candleby Lane in a generally southeasterly direction, just showing you the site on the left here. And then standing on the access road, apologies, it's a little bit dark, shows how late into the evening we're working these days, I think. Looking down the access road across at the Futures building on the opposite side of Candleby Lane. Again, standing on the access, but looking now more northwesterly at the properties on the opposite side. And then again at the top of the access road, and you can see again the site here on the left. And then again, looking at the end of the refurbished shop units, and then looking across the car park in a generally northerly direction, picking up those adjacent properties. Again, looking back towards Canterbury Lane with the site in the foreground here. And then standing within the precinct area, as I say, this has been the subject of a lot of development and refurbishment, as you can see. And then looking with the application site on the left here. That's now looking across at the cafe building, which would be retained. So that's generally a southerly direction. And then the existing play area, which sits immediately to the southeast of the application site. So again, footpath link down onto Canterbury Lane with the application site on the right in that shot. That's just stood obviously in the open space area looking back at the site with the playground in the foreground. And then we move on to the plans. So the proposal, Chairman, is, as I say, a terrace of 3 shops. The largest one would have a gross internal floor area of 485 square metres. Number 2 and 3 are 84 square metres, and the end one is 122 square metres. There's a reconfiguration of the access, so deliveries would come up the access here into a delivery area here, and the car park to the north would be reconfigured in that format. So when you saw the pictures, the car park did come down past the end of these buildings, but this proposal effectively runs the end elevation level with the rear of the existing terrace of shops. The proposal is that these would be for A1 use, 1 to 3, and the 4th one would be for an A1 or A3 user. Just while I'm on that issue, the site is obviously within the retail frontage. The policy that we look to ensure is that 60% of the units are in retail use. Currently, without this block, the percentage of retail units in this area is below that policy position. If this was built and were all A1, that would take us above the 60% threshold. If this end unit was to be used for an A3 cafe use, then it would dip just below the 60% threshold, but we believe the benefits of the scheme are sufficient to outweigh any potential slight deviation from that policy position. That's just again showing you a bit more detail, the layout of the building. This one is intended, I think, as a food retailer. And then just to give you a flavour of what the building would look like, it would be single storey, so the other shop units are 2-storey with the business centre above the shop units. This would be a single storey building, again of a contemporary design to reflect the general character and appearance of the buildings within the wider precinct area. So that's looking at effectively the internal face of the building facing into the precinct. You can see the outline there of the adjacent terrace. That's the back that would face out onto Canterbury Lane, although I would point out that there is going to be a sort of degree of landscaping in this area that would soften the impact of that elevation. That's the end elevation that faces the playground in a sort of a southeasterly direction. So that building would have glass along the entire end elevation wrapping around the corner. And again, just taking away some of the details so you can see the building more clearly in that shot. These are provided to give, again, a bit of a flavour for what it might look like. Artist impressions showing the building here on the right, and again looking down the precinct to the building at the end, and then again closer shots there. So, Chairman, the issue here, this is within the town centre for Cotgrave. The principle of retail development on this site is acceptable. It is obviously then down to matters of design and access. I referred to the policy about percentage of retail frontage, but as I say, at the present time we are below the threshold. This will take us close to or above, depending on what the use of that end unit is. Chairman, I won't dwell on it any longer. That one is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker this evening. Councillor Richard Butler, the ward councillor. I think you know the procedure, but for the benefit of others present, when you press the right-hand side button, your time will start. You have 5 minutes, and unfortunately, if you don't finish in that time, we do have to cut you off. So,
Understood.
when you're ready.
Funny to be sitting here. I'm actually speaking on behalf of Mr. Meese, who lives at number 26 Candleby Lane, across the road. He's a resident, obviously. He was going to speak today, but unfortunately family illness means he can't be here tonight, so that's why I'm speaking on his behalf. He's lived across the road from the site for over 50 years and has had a direct view of the rear loading bays of the now demolished row of shops, and it wasn't an attractive site for him to look at. Over the years, he's seen antisocial behaviour going on in the loading bays of the old shops, often into the evening, rowdy behaviour, smoking and so on, which again he's not, understandably not very happy about. And with the demolished shops now gone, there is still some antisocial behaviour going on there. He's disappointed that the new application means that he'll again be looking at the rear of the shops. He thinks it's strange that as before, people approaching the area will see rear of shops and not shop fronts. And he also thinks that by having building shops here again, it will block the view towards the now very attractive refurbished other shops and the new hub. He says that the council has done a very good job of refurbishing the existing shops in the new hub, although he's not happy that the police offices are hidden away in the hub building. He feels it's a lost opportunity to finish the regeneration area off in an attractive and welcoming way. However, he believes that if new buildings have to be built on the site of the old shops, they should include a police station, which would be more visible to more people and give confidence to residents. Ideally, he'd like to see the area simply landscaped and left open as a general amenity, but I think he does appreciate that there is likely to be building taking place there. He also pointed out that if new shops are really needed, they should be located on the other side of the hub area, nearer to or opposite the existing co-op. He's also worried that at the current location, he's worried that delivery lorries will struggle to negotiate the tight entrance to the incline that leads up to the site from the road, and also issues and concerns of people parking on Candleby Lane near the approaches, near the approach drive up there, and also he understands that there's been a loss of a few, or there will be a loss of a few car park spaces in the existing, alongside the existing shops. So he's worried that because of that, people might be tempted to park on the approach road leading up to the new units. And finally, he observed that the plans intend to have a wraparound window arrangement on the on the smaller unit end of the proposals. Whereas the other end, where the largest food store is proposed, doesn't appear to have that. And he just felt that perhaps it would have been nice to have a window arrangement on that end to perhaps open it up a bit more and help a better view through to the existing shops and hub. So that, Madam Chairman, is basically the points that Mr. Meese has asked me to make, which I'm very happy to do on his behalf. And just so you understand the bearings of where he lives at number 26, Candleby Lane, which is just there's a row of terraced houses literally across the road, on the other side of the road from the site, and he lives in the end house. So thank you very much. I've still got a minute to go, I could fill, but I won't. Hopefully committee have got those main points from Mr. Meese. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers for this one, so I'm looking for councillors. Anyone wish to speak? So, Councillor Thomas, please.
Thank you. I've got three questions or potential issues. One is the rear of the shops and the security of the rear of shops and the layout of the delivery area in terms of waste disposal and so on. I haven't seen very much about that in the plans, and I was just going to ask Mr. Pegram if there's anything specific on that. Given in particular the concerns that have been raised by residents about antisocial behaviour and rats and so on. I was also going to ask about electric charging points, whether or not any of those have been provided. And I noticed from the layout of the, which you've got up on the screen at the moment, the layout of the supermarket block, there don't appear to be customer toilets in there. And I was wondering if there are public toilets at all on the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pegram.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the layout of the proposal, and as you can see, this is the delivery area to the rear. As far as I understand, the intention is to landscape this area to soften it, but not necessarily to enclose it fully, because I think there's a double-edged sword in that respect. Clearly, if you enclose it with fencing and people can get in, they can get up to mischief. So I think there is, to a certain extent, some merit in having a degree of surveillance of that area to prevent possible antisocial behaviour. In terms of electric charging points, sorry, I can't answer that one in relation to this. There may be charging points on the wider site, but I'm not 100% sure in respect to this one. In terms of public toilets, again, just say for my sins, I haven't been to the multi-service building yet, but I would imagine there are toilets in there because it is a customer service centre and a medical centre, etc. So that would be, I think, probably the closest public toilets.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Have you all registered? Oh, Councillor Brennan.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
The benefit of the audience, it is a new system, which is only our second attempt at using it at this meeting.
Hear me? Excellent. Yes. Thank you very much. Oh gosh, that's quite loud now. Okay, what I said was I welcome the application. As I understand it, this is the sort of final part of the regeneration of Cotgrave Town Centre, which I think looks fabulous, and I have visited it. Taking on board all the issues that the residents have raised, there's a limit to what I suppose you can plan out some of these issues, but you can't plan out others, such as antisocial behaviour, which would be matters that would need to be raised with the police and others. But to the extent to which the design has taken account of the needs of its users, it seems to me to be an excellent investment in the town centre. And the other point that I made was there are a lot of other village and town centres around the borough that would welcome some kind of similar scale of investment. So I welcome this. I take on board the points about recycling points and about disposal of waste, but I think those have been addressed in the conditions. And I welcome it, and I'm happy to move that we support the recommendation.
Anyone seconding? Thank you. Oh, Councillor Thomas, you wish to speak.
I was going to propose an amendment to ensure that electric charging points for vehicles are included, if not elsewhere on site, in the new car park.
Are they in there? Just checking that the seem to be omitted. Are they? Thank you.
Well, I was actually going to say exactly the same thing. But there's a secondary issue about the location of the recycling bins, which is brought up in the recycling person's comments, or I can't remember their name, which I don't think is addressed in the conditions. So I wonder if that could be addressed in conditions as well. It said that where they're going to be relocated to might reduce their use.
Can you switch your microphone?
It's gone anyhow.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm reliably informed that, as you're aware, obviously the site has been subject to refurbishment already, and that there's obviously a car parking area here and also over that serves a multi-service centre, and I'm reliably informed that there are already car charging points in that area. So I don't think the condition is necessary in this instance. In terms of the recycling bins, this is the area here where it was proposed to site some recycling bins, which are right next to residential properties. So clearly there were some concerns from officers that those recycling bins in that location could cause disturbance and nuisance to those residents. They don't now form part of this application. They've been omitted from this application, but I understand there are discussions going on between the applicant and our Recycling to Go officer about provision of recycling bins elsewhere on the wider site in a more suitable location where they wouldn't necessarily cause disturbance to nearby residents.
Thank you, that's okay with that. Councillor Verdi, please.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to endorse Councillor Brennan's motion that we proceed with this. I think the primary concerns around security and deliveries and so on up in paragraphs 11 and 8 with the restricted times. Antisocial behaviour, I think, is going to be very difficult to plan, as we say, but I think we should move to approve this.
Thank you. Well, the recommendation is on page 23. It's been proposed by Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Verdi, that the planning permission be granted subject to the following conditions. And did we find the electricity point one?
I said they're in the wider site already. There's some.
Right, so that's okay. So with all those conditions that are listed on your agenda, all those in favour, please show.
Right, we'll go on to our next application then, which is land north-east of Marle Close, Wilford Road, Ruddington. And this is a residential development of 167 new homes. And Mr. Pegram, I think you're talking us through this again, please.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you.
So, Chairman, the application, as you say, is an application seeking full planning permission. So you're looking at the full bag here in terms of the principle and the details of layout and appearance, access, etc. So it's all up for consideration this evening. Let me just put the pointer back on. This one. Okay, let's go there. I'm not having a good night with technology, Chairman. Right, that's better. Right, so Chairman, the application site is on the northern side of the village in Ruddington. The application site is effectively the area outlined in red on the screen. I should say, Chairman, before I continue, you have a late representation on this application. If members were minded to grant permission, there's an additional condition that I would be recommending, which is the standard one we're now applying to do with water consumption in the building. So it's the 110 litres per person per day, which the dwelling should be designed to achieve. Carrying on, Chairman, then the application site in total is 17.65 hectares. The site, part of the site is allocated in your local plan part 2 for around 130 dwellings. The allocation is effectively everything south of Packman Dyke, which is the dyke which I'm indicating on the plan there. So everything south of that dyke is allocated in local plan part 2 for around 130 dwellings. Just another landmark point is Sellers Field there. So again, that's the site in terms of the context of the aerial photograph. There's the golf course across the road. And again, just to relate the site area where built development would occur, it's everything south of the Packman Dyke, which is allocated in the local plan part 2. Just taking you through some photographs. This is stood on Wilford Road at the northern extremity of the site, so it's in effectively that north-eastern corner, looking back towards the village and the existing properties on the northern edge of the village. That's looking in a generally westerly direction. Effectively, that forms the northern boundary of the site. Then looking again across the field and moving into the site now and looking across the field to the properties to the southwest. Again, now turning around, looking more southerly, and you start to pick up Sellers Field here. Looking southerly down Wilford Road, so the application site is on the right in this shot behind the hedgerow. Moving closer into the site. So again, application site's on the right and the recreation ground is behind these trees. Turning around, looking the other way in a more northerly direction. And then looking across in a westerly direction. This is a picture I pinched from an earlier presentation. I'll show you a more up-to-date one in a moment, but that's Packman Dyke, which you can see runs very linear across the northern extent of the proposed developable area. That's a more recent shot showing that dyke. And then moving closer into the site and into the village. And again, spinning around, looking back out in the out of the village towards the north. That's now stood effectively down close to the southwestern corner of the site, looking across the site. And then in the site, looking along that roadside boundary in a northerly direction. This is stood at southern side of the recreation ground, looking north. So that's the northern boundary beyond which is the application site, and then the application site wraps around the western side of the recreation ground. Moving now to a footpath adjacent Trent Avenue. So this is looking northerly towards the site with buildings on Trent Avenue to the right. And then across the field, you're picking up some properties on Mile Close now. Moving up that footpath. And then turning, looking westerly. So those are the properties which front Brookside. And then spinning around gradually. So Brookside moving around towards Mile Close. And just a more close-up shot of some of those properties. This is now looking up the western edge of the recreation ground, so we've moved to the top of that footpath you saw in the last photographs, looking along the edge of the recreation ground with the application site on the left, wrapping around the top of the recreation ground. And then again, just spinning around from that point, looking across the field. Properties on Mile Close. And then looking in a more northwesterly direction out of the village. That's now looking along the northern boundary of the recreation ground, back towards Wilford Road, with the roadside boundary hedge that you can see in the distance. And then again, just looking generally northerly out of the site to give you a flavour for the character of that area. These are some pictures, Chairman, which one of the residents has sent to us. You will have picked up from the report that there are concerns about flooding in this area. Clearly, we have had a lot of rain in recent months, and there's some standing water within the recreation ground, which illustrates that concern, if you like. So, Chairman, moving on, that's again the application plan showing the outline of the site. And the proposal, as I say, is for 167 dwellings. Excuse the scale of the plan. Effectively, access would be off of Wilford Road here. There would be a roughly 22-metre green swathe between the dwellings and the road. access comes in effectively through the site, and then dwellings are served off of a number of cul-de-sacs with a loop round on this one. All of the dwellings along this southern edge are proposed to be bungalows, and then there is a mixture of dwellings within the site as set out in the report. In terms of the affordable housing, Chairman, the main clusters are in that location there. There's some clustered in here and here. Some of the bungalows are affordable housing, and then there's some more affordable housing up on that western edge of the development. You'll see from this also, as part of the drainage strategy for the site and to address the issues of potential flood risk, it is proposed to realign the Packman Dyke and meander it through that area to the north, and to provide an attenuation basin. I think members may have been sent a pamphlet which illustrates how the intention to develop this site is proposed. Effectively, material will be taken out of the area to the north and used to raise the levels within the site, so that all dwellings will be minimum of 600 millimetres above the 1 in 100 year flood event. I know there's some concern clearly in terms of what impact that may have on neighbours, Chairman, and the surrounding area. Effectively, obviously we have to consider, as part of an assessment of a flood risk assessment, not only the risk to flooding to the site and to future residents, but also the impact of development on flooding on adjacent sites and in the area generally. The drainage strategy in this instance is that everything in terms of the site drainage, surface water, would flow north into an attenuation basin and ultimately into the Packman Dyke. Oh, excuse me, Chairman, go back one. So that's the proposal for surface water drainage. The scheme has been scrutinised by the lead local flood authority and the Environment Agency. Neither have raised any objections and are satisfied that, providing development is carried out in accordance with the flood risk assessment, that the proposal will not lead to or exacerbate flooding in the area. The report basically says, Chairman, that parts of the site are already out of the flood zone and at the level which would satisfy that 600 millimetre freeboard. Clearly there are other parts, particularly in the northern area, that will need to be raised to provide the raising of the ground level. Once that raising has taken place, Chairman, I understand that the applicant will then make a flood risk challenge to the Environment Agency, and if the site is demonstrated to be removed from the flood zone maps would be amended, so any future occupants buying those dwellings would not be buying a property in an area at risk of flooding, either flood zone 2 or 3. Just a bit of colour to the plan, Chairman, so you can see the affordable housing again identified by the coloured stars or dots. You can see the re-meandering of the dyke. Interestingly enough, Chairman, our archaeology advisor has found evidence to suggest that, in fact, the dyke didn't follow a dead straight line as it does now. In the past, it did, not necessarily this exact line, but did actually meander through that field. So it's an interesting historical point, probably. That's the wider area. So the proposal includes as I say, the flood mitigation measures in this area, but also this whole area would be turned over to informal recreation, so people could walk, not just the residents of the development, but residents of the area generally could walk in this area. And as I say, the intention is that the ground rises up through here, and the intention is that excavation will be taken out of this area, deposited on the site to increase those levels within the site. That's a flavour of the dwellings that are proposed within the proposed development, Chairman. You can see the bungalows along the southern edge of the development there. And just to, I won't dwell on these particularly long, but just to flick through so you've got a flavour for the designs of the proposed dwellings that are being put forward on this site. Very traditional in design. Mix of materials including some render. The application was also accompanied by these plans, Chairman, which are tracking diagrams for our refuse vehicle, demonstrating that our refuse vehicle would be able to access the site and turn within the various turning areas. If I'd probably go back, Chairman, and leave it on, if I come across onto here. Leave it on that one, Chairman. So, Chairman, as I say, I would reiterate the site is allocated for around 130 dwellings in the local plan Part 2. Obviously, the site has been scrutinised through that process in terms of site selection, in terms of issues relating to flooding and all other matters. It's considered that the proposal satisfies the requirements of policy 6.1 within the local plan. As you can see set out in the report, in the appraisal section, we've considered each of the bullet point or criteria requirements for policy 6.1, and we are satisfied that this proposal satisfies all the requirements of the policy. In addition, Chairman, it will deliver 30% affordable housing. As I say, one of the principal issues that we've been looking at as well is the issue of flood risk, and that has been scrutinised by the relevant technical consultees and found to be acceptable. Again, Chairman, I won't dwell any longer because I suspect there will be some questions, so I will leave it there. There is a Section 106 agreement associated with this application. You have at the back of the report the table which sets out the contributions that we would be seeking from this development. In addition, members will be aware that we've adopted CIL now, Community Infrastructure Levy, and the proposal would make contributions for infrastructure and also a contribution to the Memorandum of Understanding improvements for the A52 corridor. The Section 106 is not yet completed, Chairman, so the recommendation is that the Executive Manager for Communities be authorised to grant planning permission subject to the prior signing of that Section 106 and the conditions which are set out in the report, plus the additional one which I've recommended in terms of water consumption. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we have two speakers on this application. We have a speaker in favour of the application and we have a speaker who has objections. So the first speaker is Mr. Harley, who is the agent of the applicant. So as you probably saw, you have up to 5 minutes to talk to us, and as soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button, the red light will come on, and the clock will start counting down. Thank you.
These proposals would deliver one of the Council's allocated housing sites in the adopted Part 2 local plan. The housing is proposed on land which the Council has already removed from the Greenbelt to help meet the pressing need for new homes across the borough. Bloor Homes first held a public consultation event in the village to present and discuss our ideas for this site in 2015. Very early on, we also engaged actively with the parish council and met with representatives on numerous occasions. Many of the key principles proposed for the development of this site in 2015 and promoted and discussed since remain part of the proposals before you today. These include 5 broad items. Number 1, a mix of house types and sizes to meet a range of needs, with a focus on family 3 and 4 bed houses. However, the application also includes bungalows, including wheelchair-accessible bungalows, and a policy-compliant 30% affordable housing. The site would deliver 167 homes in total. Number 2, retaining a landscaped northern edge to the site defined by the Packman Dyke and retaining a green gateway to the village when approaching along Wilford Lane. Number 3, incorporating land to the north of Packman Dyke to deliver ecological, open space and recreational benefits, as well as forming part of a comprehensive drainage and flood risk management strategy, which I will refer to again in a moment. Number 4, foot and cycle links to integrate the new housing with the existing village. And 5, extensive hedge and tree planting and retention as part of the comprehensive green infrastructure and landscaping. The proposed master plan, including land retained in the Greenbelt to the north of the Dyke as part of the green infrastructure, results in approximately 12.5 hectares, which is more than 30 acres, proposed as accessible ecological and biodiversity areas and public open space, significantly more than is required by policy. This proposed use of the Greenbelt land to the north of the Dyke as green open spaces is consistent with the purposes and character of the Greenbelt. For clarity, there is no built development proposed in the Greenbelt here. The officer's report provides a thorough and clear explanation of the proposals and of the policy context, and I do not intend to repeat much of that detail. However, the site status is set out clearly with regard to the adopted core strategy requirement for new homes to be built in Ruddington and the now adopted Part 2 plan which allocates this site for development. The officer's report is clear that the benefits of the proposals weigh heavily in their favour. The core strategy identifies a minimum, not a maximum, level of new housing development for Ruddington. The adopted Part 2 plan allocates this site with an approximate level of housing development. A design-led approach has been taken, working with officers. With the inclusion of land north of the Dyke to deliver the open space and flood mitigation areas, the proposals would enable a more efficient use of the allocated housing site south of the dyke. This results in a higher number of homes being deliverable while ensuring a high quality layout and appropriate density. This also means the site will deliver more affordable homes. In designing the proposals, we have engaged with the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority regarding a sustainable way to manage localised flood risk and take full account of the future effects of climate change. These technical consultees have scrutinised the application and have accepted the proposals which would transfer the existing flood risk fully to the north of the dyke. With associated ground contouring, including level raising south of the dyke and increasing the capacity of the dyke itself, the strategy will remove the new homes from the higher flood zones 2 and 3, the higher risk zones, and also benefit existing homes adjacent to the site. To be clear, these statutory technical consultees have considered the proposals in detail and there are no objections or outstanding concerns from them or any other statutory consultees. Indeed, the reduced flood risk to downstream areas and to the nearby existing residential areas south of the site is another of the benefits of these proposals. We understand that some local people do have concerns about flood risk now and in the future. Our work, including involvement by the Environment Agency, should give both them and you, members, assurance that these issues can and will be improved using tried and tested methods. In summary then, the proposed housing site is allocated for development. The proposals represent sustainable, high quality development, and crucially the site will make a direct and significant contribution to meeting the borough's housing needs and make effective and efficient use of this development site. Bloor Homes is keen to begin delivering the site quickly, and if approved as recommended, is keen to finalise and sign the 106 as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And so that's within 5 minutes. So we now go on to our second speaker on this item, who is one of the ward members, and that's Councillor Mike Gaunt, please. And as soon as you're ready.
Have I turned it on? Yeah, okay. This application cannot go ahead. Despite long-running objections from Ruddington Parish Council and hundreds of village residents, this contentious site was included in the final local plan Part 2. However, the government's planning inspector's recommendation that no more than 130 properties should be built off Wolford Road, due to much of this site being in National Flood Zones 2 and 3, seems to have been disregarded both by Bloor Homes and the planning officers, cramming 167 dwellings onto this land, which is 37 more than allocated under the local plan. This brings a total of 578 houses, as I've said before, over the 4 designated village sites. But what's more alarming about this site is the very real issue of flooding that I don't think has been fully talked about tonight. The site is mostly in flood zones 2 and 3 and is regularly flooded in both summer and winter. Okay. Well, that's only okay. It's currently flooded right now, this water standing on the ground, obviously. In July 2012, Halcro carried out risk and drainage technical appraisal of the field and the Packman Dyke. The appraisal included recommendations to carry out hydraulic modelling of the Packman Dyke to assess the behaviour of the stream. In October 2015, Hydroland consultants produced hydraulic modelling of the Packman Dyke. It seems all the flood risk data that we have is linked to these models and is fed into flood risk assessments and maps for this site. The latest hydraulic modelling data used comes from no later than August 2016. This means that all the flood risks that we've been estimated from data gathered before the building of hundreds of new homes upstream at the Melton Road site in Edwalton. From September the 18th, 2017, Florforth Lane from Ruddington to the Wheatcroft Island was closed to traffic so that civil engineers could carry out work on behalf of Bovis Homes. The road was closed for the completion of new drainage works, which saw the installation of a stormwater outfall into the drainage ditch of Packman Dyke. This was needed due to, quote, expected extra runoff from the new Bovis Homes development in former greenfields to the north of the roundabout. This application needs to be rejected now so that up-to-date flood risk can be carried out along the Packman Dyke in response to this new housing. From my investigations of the flood management at Edwalton, by looking at their plans, the surface water is gathered in pond and suds, and under normal circumstances this works to make sure the discharge is at a level similar to the levels of an undeveloped greenfield site. However, if that pond is full, or in the times of extreme rainfall, the excess water is sent directly into the Packman Dyke. In a major storm, this will see rapid runoff into Packman Dyke straight downstream, through Ruddington and onto that field at Wilford Road. So this site has to be rejected unless all members of the committee can be 100% certain that the current flood risk is actually taken into account in that new development and the excess runoff that's coming from that site, which it doesn't, because it was done before that site was built. Okay? A second reason that this should be rejected is the flood mitigation that is going to be used by Bloor in this development. In order to reduce the impact of flooding and accommodate that huge extra number of houses, they're shifting the Packman Dyke northwards and encroaching onto yet more precious greenbelt to create this managed floodplain. This is not land that has been released under local plan. Releasing more greenbelt around Ruddington needs to be taken very seriously indeed, because it's been very contentious. Thirdly, the plateau that they're talking about building, raising up the floodplain, will raise the height of the land bordering existing properties in order to lift the new houses above the flood zone. Sitting around, I've heard other papers that said 1 to 1.2 metres above existing housing, due to the levels change proposed. This will have severe impacts on existing properties which currently set above the level of the floodplain, will instead find themselves directly in the runoff areas from the new estate. Surely we have to understand that there is a great danger that the existing houses will become flooded in future flood events should they be allowed to end up at the level that is now lower than the new development. So even if, when that flood dike does flood, those houses, the water's got to go somewhere. I know it's going to be heading north, but some will eventually head south into those houses around. Right, these plans must be rejected and rethought. However, if for some extraordinary reason you do think it's okay, there need to be some conditions that we need to have attached, and I don't think they've been fully done that. Ruddington Parish Council, many other residents, have expressed disappointment that their request for Section 106 funding from the developer relating to 3 specific schemes has not been added. These are the creation of footpaths and cycle paths to connect to the existing footways for people to get into the village, signalled pedestrian crossing over Wilford Road for children walking to the primary school, that isn't in there, and the purchasing of land that they requested from Ruddington Grange Golf Club, and the funds to create a tarmac path to the school across the back to make it safer for children to get to school. These must at the very least be conditions that are set and met before a single house could be built and a single child moves into any of those houses. Otherwise, they're going to be crossing that very busy Wilford Road in the dark and put themselves at risk. Please reject this application tonight. Firstly, on the grounds of extreme risk of flooding that has not been fully discussed, and the fact that the community has been ignored on many things. Thank you.
Okay, just on 5 minutes as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Can you just turn your microphone off, please? Right, thank you very much. So we've heard from Mr. Harley on behalf of the applicant, and Councillor Gaunt, who was speaking against the application over the various points raised. Could you pick up on those, please, Mr. Pegram?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Chairman, the main issues really, I think it was highlighted, and I did say that it was a very sensitive issue, was that of flooding. I would reiterate, Chairman, that the lead local flood authority and the Environment Agency have scrutinised the flood risk assessment for this site. They have resolved not to object to the application. They haven't raised any concerns about the validity of the information within that report. And I think all I can suggest members should take comfort in the fact that it has been scrutinised by those statutory bodies. We haven't taken it on face value. We haven't just accepted what the developers told us. We have gone to great lengths to discuss in detail with Lead Local Flood Authority and the Environment Agency. One of the concerns, Chairman, was that perhaps the flood risk assessment doesn't take into account other development in the area, particularly that at Ed Walton. Chairman, in terms of a drainage and flood risk strategy, what the Lead Local Flood Authority will be looking for, and we will seek to control through conditions and negotiations on the development, is that the surface water runoff from any development site is no worse than the greenfield runoff rate prior to the development taking place. And in fact, what the Lead Local Flood Authority look for is a thing called QBAR, which is a betterment over and above the greenfield runoff rate. So this may sound flippant, Chairman, but no further rain will land on this site after it's developed than did before.
It's a conspiracy.
To a certain extent, Chairman, the development of a site in this way does provide for management of the surface water runoff. Yes, it will go into the attenuation pond, and then it will be released as and when the systems around that site cater for the flows. So as I say, the QBAR situation is actually a betterment over and above the greenfield runoff rate from the site. In terms of the encroachment into the green belt, Chairman, the That's good. It's come across. The existing Packman Dyke runs effectively through that area there in a straight line. All of that area to the south has been removed from the Greenbelt through the adoption of the Local Plan Part 2 and the Greenbelt Review. Everything to the north remains within the Greenbelt and will do so. Although there is some engineering operations to take place, including the creation of the flood mitigation and the realignment of the Packman Dyke, under paragraph 146 of the MPPF, those types of developments are considered as exceptions to the general rule that any development in the Greenbelt is inappropriate. So this development does not breach any Greenbelt policies, Chairman. In terms of the flood risk and the raising of the levels, Chairman, the majority of the zones 2 and 3 is confined to the northern end of the site. I'm being general because it is more in that area. The flood risk assessments that were undertaken and the assessments carried out by the drainage engineers did suggest that, in fact, the extent of flooding was not as great as indicated on the flood risk maps. So clearly, the back of the site, there would be less raising, or perhaps than there would be at the front of the site, to raise those levels to achieve the 600 millimetres above flood level. Levels was mentioned, Chairman, and that is dealt with in condition 21. So you have some indicative or illustrative details of levels, but the condition would seek for those levels to be confirmed before development commences on the site. In terms of the conditions and restrictions on any permission, Chairman, there was reference made of Section 106. Clearly, Chairman, you've got the Section 106 table that sets out the requirements for this development. The requirements under the SIL regulations for 106 and SIL contributions is that the requirements must be necessary to make the development acceptable, relevant to planning and relevant to the development. Clearly, there was a suggestion of a footpath across land on the opposite side of the road to access the school. That is land over which the applicant has no control, and there's no guarantee that they could gain control over that land. So I think that would be an unreasonable requirement. The other point I would mention, Chairman, is that the development will deliver a SIL receipt. The parish council would receive a proportion of that SIL receipt, and the parish council can then use that as they see fit on other infrastructure provision or works within the village. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Pegram. Let's pick those points up. So now we open it up for discussion, questions, debate. Councillor Beardsall, please. First light I saw, anyway.
Yes. No. Am I on?
Yep.
Yes? Yep, good. There's just one point that the last speaker made, which wasn't responded to by Mr. Pegram, and that was in relation to the number of houses being built. The fact that, well, we heard that the planning officer, the national planning officer, had recommended no more than 130 homes. You didn't respond to that point. I wonder if you could respond to that, because I feel it's vitally important that housing developments are not overcrowded, and for many, many reasons. I won't go into those for the moment, but just like to get a response on that, please.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pegram, yes, the number of houses as per... Yeah.
Councillor Major, I think. Oh, that's it. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Chairman, I did touch on this in the beginning. The site is allocated for around 130. I don't have the inspector's report in front of me, obviously, so I can't refer to or check the specific reference. However, Chairman, my understanding is that the local plan part 2 that we have adopted is in accordance with the inspector's recommendations. This site was put forward for around 130. There were some modifications made to the plan. That didn't include suggesting that the site should be no more than 130. Paragraph 3.12 of the Local Plan Part 2 provides, if you like, some guidance on how your planning policy officers have arrived at the capacity for sites within the Local Plan Part 2. For a site of this size in this type of location, the starting point would be a density of 20 dwellings to the hectare. The allocated area, as I indicated, was everything south of the Packman Dyke. This proposal does result in a gross density of 25 dwellings to the hectare, as we've calculated it. That, in your officer's view, is not excessive. The other aspect, Chairman, clearly is that the applicant has been creative, if you like. They've created the flood mitigation in the area to the north. If that wasn't in that area, that would potentially have to be somewhere on this site, and that would take up a large part of the site. So clearly, by using the area to the north, they have been able to maximise the number of dwellings, if you like, that they can get into this area, but not to the extent that your officers consider it to be excessive or over intensive.
Thank you. Does that help, Councillor?
That helps.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Major, please.
Bear with me, I've got a few questions I wanted to clarify. So the first one is, it references that there'll be 2 parking spaces for each dwelling except those in apartment buildings, and I just wanted to clarify where, if there has been any provision for parking within, for those who are in apartments. Second one was around I'm slightly confused around why the primary school provision in section 106 is only a recommendation, and it suggests that the applicant is questioning that. I obviously would like to, there's obviously going to be a need for primary school places, and I'd like that to be confirmed. And then I'm not quite sure why the secondary places are covered by the SIL and not specifically referred to in the section 106, so it would just be useful to understand. And to be reassured that those secondary places are going to be provided, because that's an entire form in my head. And then the third one was, I've noticed on another application that there has been a condition to ensure that that facilities for broadband are installed in each of the houses to support home working, and I was wondering if that's something could also be factored into this application, because I think that's a positive thing. And then just to pick up on Councillor Gaunt, it does strike me as slightly concerning that there is no provision for a crossing on Wilford Road, regardless of where people are going. It is a busy road, and there will be people coming out of there, and I can't quite see on that map where they would be expected to cross over if they did want to get to the other side of the road, and whether that's something we could look at providing a safe crossing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, have you got those? The parking for apartments. Yeah. And clarification of primary school allocation, secondary places in SIL, and broadband, and the road crossing.
Thank you, Chairman. I will try and multitask here, which I've tried to in the past, not always successfully. In terms of the broadband, that is the subject of a condition 24. Before it's raised, Chairman, members will also note there is a condition requiring a 32 amp charging socket for charging electric vehicles on each of the properties. In terms of the parking for the apartments, there is parking for the apartments, Chairman, but not necessarily at the same ratio as the other houses, so there would be parking for them. They are, I think, generally one-bedroom apartments, so therefore not felt they would necessarily generate high car ownership. In terms of the primary school issue, I know is the subject of discussions with our solicitor, the county and the developers. The initial, sorry, excuse me, the situation is clearly with any contributions, they have to be justified. What we look at with the county council is firstly, is there any capacity within the existing schools? And clearly, if, for instance, there was 35 places in the school and the development generated 70 places, you'd collect contributions for 35 places. There was some confusion over the information that the county council provided, which suggested that there might be capacity in the local school. That has been clarified. There is no capacity, so we will be, as far as I understand it at this moment in time, we will be seeking a primary school contribution for the provision of additional places at the primary school in the area. SIL deals with secondary because to a certain extent secondary has a greater catchment. So in terms of a more strategic approach, we're collecting secondary contributions through the SIL. Primary schools we would expect to see within or close to the village where the development is taking place, and therefore that is still collected through section 106. I think that answers all the points, Chairman. Crossing.
The Wilford Road.
Yeah,
crossing.
the Chairman, Highways have scrutinised this application. They do not object. As far as I understand it, the part of the proposal, or part of the changes that will occur as well, which may give a degree of comfort, is that currently the 30-mile-an-hour zone is stops here, and then it's open speed limit. As part of the development of this site, the 30-mile-an-hour zone would be moved further out, So obviously vehicles would not be travelling at such speeds as they come into the village. There is existing footpaths in the area as well, which link back into the village. So there is that option to use the existing footpath network to get back to the village.
Okay, thank you very much. Does that help, Councillor Major? Right, thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Thomas.
Oh,
please.
hello. I've got a few questions as well.
Okay.
Related to this issue of a crossing, on the diagram there's a connecting footpath from the field, as it were, at the top of the site onto Wilford Lane at the top. I think that's a connecting footpath. Is there a footpath along that side of the road? And if not, what are the visibility displays like for pedestrians wanting to cross there?
Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that this has been overlaid over an aerial photograph. There is an existing access point in that area. I'm not sure that necessarily the intention is that there would be an access out at that point. There's a circular path around the site. There isn't a public footpath that runs in this area to connect up across the road. That's the golf course opposite. There is a footpath on a pavement on the other side of Wilford Road. You saw in the photographs, not on this side. In terms of connections to public footpaths, there is a footpath that runs up through here, and there's also a footpath that runs down through Trent Avenue. So there's connections to those footpaths. As I say, that may be a little bit misleading. I think that's something on the base map that might be suggesting there's going to be a footpath across at that point.
Okay, thank you. Some other questions as well, I think.
Well, I mean, that could be a positive... I've got to push it again. Oh, right. I mean, that could be a positive thing to have a connecting footpath out there, in that people could then walk along there and then, you know, and then come out onto the road. So it looks like a positive feature to me, so long as the crossing is possible, or some sort of footpath down the that side of the road. The other thing about footpaths was in the Community Development Officer's report, there was a request for a second footpath onto Sellers Field from the Trent Avenue area, and I can't see that there, and I can't see any reason for it not to have been provided, justified in the text or any explanation for that. So that I was going to ask about that. Do you want the other things as well, or do you want me to stop?
Yes. Yeah, if you give them all the questions.
Okay. The other thing was on the flooding. Did I understand from Mr. Pegram that after the land change levels has been done, the Environment Agency has to sign off the changes to the flood map before the building takes place? And is that in a condition? And could you just clarify that for me? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got those, more clarification on the path. Could you just turn your microphone off, please, Councillor Garland?
Sorry, Chairman. Technical problems. Right. If I go across on the page. So, basically, Chairman, there is a proposed footpath link in that position there into the recreation ground. There is a footpath, as you saw in the photos earlier, that comes from this residential street through there, up the side of Trent Avenue, and then across the top. You'll see in this bottom corner there is a footpath link to that would then give people the option to go south out to Brookside or north onto the recreation ground. So it does satisfy the requirement of two connections, if you like, to the recreation ground. In terms of the flood risk challenge I mentioned, Chairman, no, they wouldn't have to do that before they started building. Effectively, they couldn't do it until they started building. The issue there, and indeed, they don't necessarily have to do that, but anyone who would then be buying a property on this site, as far as their searches would show, it would potentially show that it's still within a flood zone unless the flood zone maps were changed. So it's in the developer's interest to then apply or submit to the Environment Agency a flood risk challenge to demonstrate that the site has been raised out of the flood zone and can therefore be taken out of flood zone 2 and 3. It would remain in what we call flood zone 1, which is the area of least risk of flooding, but effectively anything outside 2 and 3 is flood zone 1. Does that help? What's that? Oh, condition 14, I'm being ably assisted by my colleague, basically deals with that issue of ensuring that the development is carried out in accordance with the flood risk assessment.
Page 64, condition 14. Okay, so while you're looking that up, my next speaker is Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Most of the points I was going to raise actually have been covered, but I would just endorse the train of thought about this pedestrian crossing. I think that's certainly almost needs to be conditional. The flood zone 3, part of this development is currently flood zone 3. I understand with ground raising we're going to lift it out of that, but if we look at the green area where that, which is going to be excavated to produce that soil or whatever we're going to move, what are we going to be left with? Is it going to be just a potential lake, the excavated area? Thank you.
Right. So the land has been taken away from the top part there. What you're going to be left with? That's what.
Well, yes, I'm envisaging a potential lake. I don't know how much soil is being moved.
It's the well, there's the attenuation pond, isn't there? Oh, sorry, yeah. I'm taking your words out of your mouth there.
No, that's fine, Chairman. Quite happy
No, you.
to relax. And no, Chairman, the strategy is that flood risk from the site will be diverted to the north into initially the attenuation basin, but also into the Packman Dyke. And as you heard the speaker for the developer say, the works that they intend to carry out there, and it's echoed in the flood risk assessment, improve the capacity of the Packman Dyke. So I would not say, hand on heart, that there will never be any standing water in this area. You saw some standing water along the western edge of the recreation ground. It's not intended to be a lake, but effectively, clearly by taking the soil from here, putting it onto the site, it's within the same area. We don't then have to import loads of soil from elsewhere, which has its own implications. But as I say, majority of the time, I would say that would be a dry area. As I say, I wouldn't say never, hand on heart, with the rain we've had recently, there might not be occasionally some standing water.
Okay, thank you. Pass it on again. Councillor Gumland, please. You're next on the list, according to this high-tech bit of wizardry.
Okay. So do I need to... Oh, right, I'm on. Okay, so starting with the simple things, can I propose that we have a condition for the crossing on the road, as everybody said we need? Secondly, on the point about energy efficiency, there's a comment from the Sustainability Officer, and it's echoed in the third paragraph to the end of the conditions, which says consideration should be given to energy efficiency and so on. This seems a bit weak. Is it possible to be more specific in terms of a particular goal for energy efficiency on these houses? And then the flood risk. So we've heard from the Ward Councillor about the hydrodynamics of the area and hydrodynamic modelling. No doubt Severn Trent are the experts, but it does seem very worrying that so much building's going on. You're talking about having a reassessment of the flood risk for the area after the land's been levelled. Clearly levelling that land is going to require raising it. I feel if I lived in the houses on that area on the left there, I might be concerned that I was going to be put into a flood risk area when I wasn't at the moment. So I would really quite like to see a proper reassessment of the hydrodynamics of the whole area before this was all undertaken. And finally, just as I've been talking, it's come to my mind, if they're going to be piling a load of earth there, presumably they're going to have to put piles in to build the houses. So is there something, and maybe I've missed this, but is there something about noise control during the building? Because presumably you're going to have to dig down through these metres of mud to hit the bedrock. So how will the houses be built?
Right, so the reference to a crossing of some kind on the road, the energy efficiency, more on flood risk and worries, and noise during construction. So
Where was Chairman? Yes, it is. It's condition 4, isn't it? Does it say anything about noise and vibration? Noise mitigation. It's just urban.
Yeah, construction management.
Yeah. Chairman, the well, in no particular order, as they say on the quiz shows and things. Mr. Taylor's been looking through the report. The report is silent on this issue of a crossing. The application has been considered by the Highway Authority. No doubt, if they were felt it was necessary, they would have recommended a crossing provided, or that the funds to provide it were secured either through a Section 106 agreement or through a Section 278 agreement under the Highway Act. All I can say on that point, Chairman, is Highways have not requested it, so they didn't feel it necessary in this instance. In terms of the comments of the Sustainability Officer, we are currently in a position, Chairman, where we encourage developers to build to the highest standards. Ultimately, at the moment, the matter of insulation, etc., is dealt with under the building regulations. There is currently a consultation being undertaken for changes to the building regulations, which we are commenting on as Borough Council, and obviously recommending that they should be more stringent to deliver those high standards. As I say, we do encourage it, and there are certainly measures within this development which you might consider to be environmentally friendly, a broadband and the charging points. Chairman, if I can just come back to this issue of flood risk and clarify it, because maybe I haven't been clear enough perhaps. The assessment has already been carried out of what is necessary to raise this site out of the flood zone and to ensure that the properties are not at risk of flooding and that the development does not exacerbate or cause flooding to neighbouring areas or neighbouring properties. So that assessment has already been carried out. There's a condition requirement that the development is carried out in accordance with that flood risk assessment. Outside of that process, once that work is done, the developer can then apply to the Environment Agency under what they call a flood risk challenge to say, we've now done all this work, but we don't want the site to be labelled as a flood zone anymore. So we want you to reassess it and we want you to consider taking it out of the flood zone. So that's a separate process. The assessment has already been carried out as part of the flood risk assessment. The Environment Agency have been consulted as part of the planning process and are satisfied with those proposals. So it's the separate process afterwards. As I said, it might be that someone buying a house wouldn't want to buy a house in flood zone 2 or 3. So the intention then would be that the developer would apply under that challenge process to have the site de-zoned effectively from 2 and 3. What's the last one? Yeah, the piling noise, yes. Chairman.
There's a condition, isn't there?
Yeah, condition 4, Chairman, is a construction management plan, and there's a bullet point that deals with details of noise and vibration. Ultimately, Chairman, I would say foundation design is a matter for building regulations. We have had recent experience where it was necessary to pile a site, and yes, it did cause some problems, but I'm satisfied that the construction management plan and the hours of working, etc., will address the issue. If it is necessary to pile the site, Chairman, again, I'm not going to lie to you, it is an inherently noisy process. We did work with the developer to ensure that that was kept to a minimum and that they did certain measures to minimise the impact on neighbouring properties. But I'm satisfied that would be dealt with under the construction management condition. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Does that help, Councillor Garland?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I just would say on the flooding. I understand, what you said about the lake. It's got to be really carefully designed, that field opposite, to not end up pouring back, because this area is going to be raised. So flooding in the stream is going to go somewhere, and it can't go to the new raised area. So there seems a big risk to me. It'll end up in the houses at a lower level, but I'm no expert.
Chairman, struggling with my throat tonight, but no, Chairman, I think again, I've seen some indicative sections of this area which demonstrate, in fact, that as I say, this would be levelled out. If there were any water running back this way, it would run into the dike first before it hit the properties. So so if there was any water running that way, that's potentially the catchment for that floodwater.
Right. Sorry about the moving of the microphones. And Councillor Beardsall, you wanted to speak, I think?
Yeah, as the dike and the attenuation pond is so crucial here, who has responsibility for keeping them maintained? And also, I assume there's a dike going further upstream or downstream. And what's the relationship there with keeping the maintenance of those dikes cleaned and cleared out, etc.?
Chairman, the current approach to management of open spaces and sustainable urban drainage systems is that the normally dealt with through a Section 106 or a condition, but sometimes 106, as I say, we would require the developer to provide the details for the long-term management and maintenance of that area under a management plan. The money to carry out that work is normally funded through a service charge on the dwellings, so they would provide for effectively the maintenance of their areas that are provided as part of the development. Clearly, again, I say the works to the dike will increase its capacity and will effectively slow the flow of water downstream, if you like to call it that. Beyond the development, we can't require the developer to carry out those works or to do works which are not on land they control or own. That would normally be down to probably the drainage board to carry out those works. So clearly, if a dike became oversilted, there's a management regime, one would think, to desilt them and dig them out and ensure that they remain free flowing.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Supplemental. Would it not be a better idea to put a management plan in first before the development starts? Because who knows whether that management plan is going to work. And if you've not put one in place with the developers yet, that's a little bit of a concern.
Chairman, we have numerous developments around the borough where effectively it is a requirement of the planning application. As far as I'm aware, so far it hasn't caused any problems on the other developments. Clearly, time will tell, but ultimately, as I say, it's a standard approach not only at this authority but other authorities in requiring management plans. We are looking at that outside of the current planning applications, because clearly, as I say, there's going to be a lot of developments with that requirement around the borough, and we want that satisfaction that in perpetuity and in the longer term they are going to be maintained and managed. But at the moment, it is seen as the standard practice with these types of developments to deal with it in that way.
Right. Councillor Goland again, please.
Yeah, sorry. Time will... Oh, what am I doing? Time will tell. So got Abbey Park as my ward, and they're battling endlessly with the developers, or the people the developers have sold the responsibility on, for just getting the verges cut, which is a minor issue compared to the risk of flooding if the dike doesn't get cleared. I don't think leaving this to the responsibility of a developer who is almost certainly not going to exist in 20 years' time, with all respect to the developer, or will have passed on the responsibility, is not good enough. Can we not arrange for this to be taken on by the drainage board now? Because it's not. The drainage board said it wasn't their responsibility, and upstream, so that we're not left in the position of having to fight with some developer in 20 years' time or 10 years' time.
Chairman, to be quite honest, the developer will not retain, once you've sold the houses and built the houses, it's unlikely they would retain responsibility or ownership for the open space and the management of it. Normally that is handed over to a management company which is set up to manage that area, and as I say, the service charge from the houses provides that funding in perpetuity. I don't know which development you're referring to. I can probably guess to a certain extent, but some of the older developments in the borough were not subject to this requirement. What used to happen is that effectively we required a commuted sum for 15 years of maintenance, and the borough council used to maintain or took on the maintenance of some developments. There are some examples where we haven't taken on the management of it, and there's no management company in place. So we do have some developments, unfortunately historic ones, where there is that problem where the area doesn't get maintained. But as I say, this is seems to be a proven way of a tested way of current developments where this is the approach.
Okay. Now, Councillor, the light flashed up. Councillor Brennan, please.
Is it me? Thank you. I was just going to say, I think it is hugely regrettable that we're faced with these decisions to have to build on these highly contentious areas that were previously greenbelt, that very often are in flood areas. We've others coming up tonight and in future committee meetings where we're going to have to make similarly challenging decisions in order to satisfy the housing supply that we need across the borough. I think it is very unfortunate. I'm not an expert on flooding or flood alleviation, so I can only base my opinion on the advice that we're given by those that are experts. And if the experts say that the mitigation is sufficient to prevent a greater increase in flooding, or any flooding in some parts of this site, then I have to go with that. I can't second guess that that's not correct. We can interrogate it, as Councillor Gaunt has done and as others done. And I think that's fair and legitimate, but I personally don't feel I can say, well, yeah, I'm not convinced by the flood experts that this mitigation is going to work. So therefore, on the basis of that, I don't think we've got any choice but to approve a recommendation to go ahead with this development. So I'd like to move that, please.
Right, okay, thank you. So you're moving the recommendation as per the report. Do you have a seconder at this stage, Councillor Purdue-Horan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, I accuse Councillor Brennan of pinching my words. I absolutely agree with everything she said, and I'd like to second the approval, and I do so with reluctance because I would like to note that Councillor Gaunt has raised some very interesting points, particularly with regard to flooding. He's clearly done research on it, and we are going to be faced increasingly with these dilemmas as we continue to build larger sites. But we have our experts, and they give us guidance, and it must be extremely frustrating for our planning officers to prepare for these meetings, because we are going to, give them searching questions. And I have to say that listening to colleagues elsewhere, the likes of, for example, the Environment Agency and perhaps others, have not covered themselves in glory in recent years with regard to flooding, and that is why we are grappling with these dilemmas. But this site has been allocated, and local plan 2 has been approved. All I can say is let us hope that the mitigation measures work, because it won't be us that are suffering, but we can see quite a lot of people will see the consequences of our decisions.
Well, you're right. I mean, we whatever application we're looking at, we're always invariably making difficult decisions and complex decisions as well, and that's why we have these meetings to bring them out into the fore. Now, we've had the proposal moved and seconded. Now, Councillor Thomas, you'd indicated to speak again. Do you want to make a point or ask another question?
Yes, am I on? Yeah, I did want to just make one. I had a specific question about the drainage of the back gardens of the houses that have been raised, and the boundary between those houses and the gardens of the existing houses. So how's it going to work? Those houses along the bottom there that have got raised back gardens, will there be a wall? Will there be a ditch? Will there be a slope sloping down to those houses? How is that going to actually work? Because I would imagine that would have quite an impact on the back gardens of those houses. Thank you.
I do, Chairman. Yes. Chairman, just to reiterate, the bulk, majority, call it what you like, of the surface water from this development will be directed northwards. Yes, there will be a degree of ground raising in this area. However, this area is currently in flood zone 1, so it's the area which is at least risk of flooding at the moment. These are bungalows along the back here. There would be a gradual slope on these gardens, as I understand it, and there are many ways of dealing with that issue. I understand potentially from talking to the developer that one option is looking at a French drain along the back of that site, which effectively then acts as a soakaway. The amount of water going in that direction, in my view, Chairman, from this development would be minimal. As I say, majority of it is to be directed to the north as part of the flood risk mitigation measures. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Sorry to keep coming back, but if that's not already in the plans, could that be a condition that the officers sign off the arrangements at the rear of those bungalows as a condition?
Well, I think it is part of the flood risk, the flood risk assessment, and the condition requires that the development is carried out in accordance with the flood risk assessment.
So it's there. Is that right? Yep. Yep. Okay. Right. I don't think we have any other speakers on this now, and we've had quite a long debate. We've been talking about it for about an hour, so which is because it's an important application, a lot to cover. We've had the recommendation moved and seconded. I think we better go to a decision, haven't we, on this? So we've got the recommendation. Can I have a show of hands, please, for those in favour of the recommendation as shown, please, in the report? And anybody against? 2. And I'd take it no abstentions, because we don't really abstain on this committee. It's either you agree or you don't agree. But there was no abstentions, was it? So is that, what was that? 9, so that was 9 in favour and 2 against. So that means permission is granted. But thank you for your contributions from both on the committee and also our speakers as well. It's very important we cover these points. Right, so we'll go on to our next application now, which is the other end of Ruddington. This is land north of Asher Lane, and this is the reserved matters application for a previous outline permission to seek approval for the access, appearance and landscaping for 175 new dwellings. So to confirm, this is where permission has already been agreed for developing, and the numbers, this is the finer details of the application. So Mr. Pegram again, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, no doubt members will be familiar with the history of this site. Outline planning permission initially refused in accordance with the officer's recommendation, and then allowed it appeal. Subsequent application for outline planning permission was again the subject of an appeal. The difference between those two schemes is the original scheme involved access out on Asher Lane. The current proposal and the most recent outline allowed at appeal involves the demolition of number 75 Musters Road and an access through out onto the adjacent highway network there. So, Chairman, this is a site where outline planning permission, as you say, has already been granted. So the principle of development has been established. This wasn't a site initially that we were looking to allocate through Local Plan Part 2, but clearly during the preparation of Local Plan Part 2, those appeals were allowed, and as a consequence, we allocated the site as an existing commitment, and the site has been removed from the Greenbelt. So, Chairman, the issues you are being asked to consider tonight are not the principle, not the highway impacts, which have all been examined through the previous applications. You're being asked to consider the 5 reserve matters, which are access, appearance, scale, layout and landscaping. So those are the matters which you must focus your attention on in considering the application this evening. That's the site, again, showing, well, it hasn't got the red line going out through 75, but effectively showing the bulk of the site there, which is the subject of the current application. It is allocated in the local plan for 175 dwellings in accordance with the permissions that were granted. So this is looking from the southern side of the site across the field, back towards the properties on Musters Road and Western Fields. Spinning around a little bit more, again, picking up the southern edge of the existing settlement. Looking across the site, so Asher Lane runs beyond the hedge. That's Asher Lane, or that's the unadopted section of Asher Lane. And then again, moving further to the east and looking across the site, there's some allotment gardens that project into the site. And then looking again north to the properties which front Musters Road. This is actually now travelling along Musters Road in the westerly direction, and we move gradually along the road until we come to the point where it's proposed to construct the access into the site. So that's looking at the bend with Western Fields going off to the left there, and then standing in Western Fields looking out of the junction, and you can just start to pick up the property on the right, which would be demolished, number 75 Musters Road, which is dead ahead there. And the proposal is to demolish that dwelling and create an access through into the development. So number 1 Western Fields to the right, 73 Musters Road to the left. And again, just showing those properties more closely. So, Chairman, this is the layout which you are being asked to consider. At this point, I will pick up on the affordable housing issue. It is largely clustered in 2 areas. There's a cluster in this area here, and there is a cluster in this area here, and some across the way there. It does include 4 bungalows. It also includes some 1-bedroom properties. The layout of that and the distribution has been scrutinised by your strategic housing manager. They are satisfied that the distribution is appropriate, although it is, if you like, in this particular area clustered. It's effectively accessed from 2 different road frontages, and therefore gives some degree of separation. This is again, just a layout plan showing in more detail. You can't see on here, but there are levels on this plan. To achieve the required drainage fall, there is a degree of raising of levels on this site. And again, effectively in the northwestern corner would be an attenuation basin, which would attenuate flood risk mitigation. Also on this plan, you can see just faintly is the tracking diagram for our refuse lorry, and that is referred to in the late representations that you have before you. And again, that's the southern end of the site, showing the distribution of dwellings. So we just come back, Chairman, just generally, there is if you like, there's a more intense development in the centre with, if you like, a lower density to the edge, given a transition from the built form into the countryside. This is the landscape strategy plan. The application does seek approval of landscaping as a reserve matter. We don't have details of the precise species, size, girth, etc. There is a condition recommended amongst the recommended conditions to require those details, but this is effectively to set the strategy. The proposal would involve the retention of the boundary hedgerows and trees around the site, obviously with the exceptions of those parts to be removed for access purposes. This is the details of the proposed access into the site. Initially, the Highway Authority had some concern because this was shown at a 6-metre wide carriageway. The Highway Authority, given the number of dwellings to be served off a single point of access, required that to be a minimum of 6.75 metres with 2-metre pavements on either side, which is what's detailed on the plan you can see before you. While I'm on this plan, Chairman, one of the considerations at the outline stage, although access was a reserve matter, was the impact of this access on the neighbouring dwellings either side of the access. It is a condition of the outline planning permission that the developer erects acoustic fencing effectively down the boundary of this property and around the back. It is detailed on a plan that's on the outline, and again down the side of this property and around the back of that property to mitigate against any potential impact of road noise. That's just again showing the general layout. And again, just to flick through, Chairman, a flavour of the dwellings. Traditional build, predominantly red brick with either grey or red roof tiles or brown roof tiles. As I say, you are being asked to consider appearance, but yeah, they're scattered depending on the house type across the development. These are some of the affordable units. These are the 1-bedroom units, Chairman. More affordable units, 2-bedroom. And 3-bedroom affordable units. The intention, Chairman, as with any development, and these are the bungalows that I mentioned on the northern side of the development, the intention, Chairman, of any affordable housing is the affordable housing should be tenure blind. So in other words, you drive onto the site, you don't see that, oh, that's the affordable housing. This is an artist's impression of what one of the streets might look like. And just to make the point about the tenure blindness issue, these are the materials that are proposed for the development. And this plan shows the distribution of those materials. I won't go into the details, but you can see that two predominant bricks being used across this site, and you can see the same bricks are to be used on the affordable units as on the open market units, so they will have the same overall appearance within the development. Again, I'll come back to that one later. So, Chairman, as I say, the outline planning permission has been granted. The principle of development has been established on this site. It is a site allocated in local plan part 2 for 175 dwellings. As I say, you are being asked to consider the issues of layout, scale, appearance, landscaping and access. We are not here, Chairman, tonight, I just have to re-emphasise this point, not here tonight to consider the principle of the development or things like the wider impact on the highway, the wider highway network. Those issues were scrutinised at the outline stage. There are relevant conditions for off-site highway improvements which will still have to be complied with as part of the conditions of the outline planning permission. There was a Section 106 agreement associated with the outline planning permission which still bites on this development, but as this is a reserved matters application, we cannot now ask for additional contributions or infrastructure provision. That has to be dealt with at the outline stage. So the application is before you, Chairman, with a recommendation that approval is granted for the appearance, layout, scale, landscaping and access to the site. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Pegram. Well, we have two speakers on this item as well. And the first one is Mr. Collins, who is the agent for the applicant. Are you here, Mr. Yes, you are, Mr. Collins. So, I know everyone's seen this, but I have to tell everyone, as soon as you're ready to speak, you press the right-hand button, the light comes on, and you have up to 5 minutes to talk to us. And if we're still talking at 5 minutes, I have to ask you to stop. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to you all. I'm not intending to use my full allowance of time, but just want to make a few key points relating to the decision that's before you tonight. First of all, I'd like to thank your officers for their very constructive approach to working with us throughout the process and the sort of considerable efforts they've put into getting us to the point where we are today with a scheme which is considered acceptable to the relevant stakeholders. Prior to even acquiring this site, Vant Homes were acutely aware of the strength of feeling surrounding the development and the challenges that they will face in delivering the scheme. As a result, they've embraced an approach of early and proactive engagement with all stakeholders, including regular meetings with your planning and highways officers, as well as the parish council and key representatives of other groups in the village, including Ruddington Action Group and the Ruddington Village Centre Partnership. They're also in ongoing dialogue with individual neighbours, including both of those adjacent to the site access, and ensuring that they're kept fully up to date with current progress and plans and are sort of happy with what's going on that front. As your officers have set out, the scheme for you today is reserve matters following the grant of outline consent and your local plan's allocation of the site. Vant Homes are striving to create high quality developments with significant emphasis placed on both the quality of the houses and also the layout within which they sit. This can be seen from the plans and the street scenes which were included in the presentation there. The access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of the development, as well as detailed technical considerations relating to flooding, drainage and highways, have each been subject to detailed consideration and discussion with your officers and the statutory consultees, and revised through the application process to the final form shown on this plan. All technical consultees have confirmed that the proposals are acceptable in all regards. The site's not at risk of flooding, and there are no objections from anyone on that front as set out in the officer's report. Due regard has been given to all constraints within the site and the relationship with the proposed dwellings adjacent to the north in terms of both levels and separation distances, and an appropriate mix of housing is proposed, which includes 53 affordable homes which are intended to be taken on by Stonewater Housing Association. However, with the principle of development established by the allocation and the outline consent, we remain very conscious of the significant concerns which remain in relation to the traffic impacts of the development, particularly during the construction phase. This has been the main focus of our ongoing dialogue with the representatives of the local residents and the business community in Ruddington, and we continue to prepare the construction management plan, which is required to address those matters by a condition on the outline consent. Once we've agreed those details in principle, it'll then be formally submitted to the Planning Authority for approval in consultation with highways officers. Similarly, the engineers working on behalf of Vantomes are liaising directly with the Highway Authority regarding the improvements required to various junctions and roads within and around the village in order to accommodate traffic from future residents on this and other developments. Again, these details are required by condition on the outline and will be subject to formal approval. Vantomes are looking to deliver a substantial investment into Ruddington and are striving to ensure they are good neighbours throughout construction and longer term that the development they create is a high quality addition to the village. We've worked hard with your planning and highways officers and other key stakeholders to arrive at this final scheme and would respectfully request that you support your officer's recommendation and approve these reserved matters.
Okay, thank you very much. That's within your 5 minutes, so thank you for that. Our next speaker on this is Councillor Walker, who is one of the ward members. So it's whenever you're ready, you can start.
We are living with the legacy of the Conservative Lib Dem coalition and the loosening of the planning rules that have opened up our green belts for development. Couple those significant changes to policy with massive cuts to local government grants, and we're left with local councils that are completely dependent on the income generated from home building. The absurdity of the Asher Lane development will not be lost on anyone who has read through it, but I'm going to pick up some key points for the committee to consider in the hopes that you'll make some suggestions and recommendations for conditions before a single shovel has touched the earth. This application was submitted in December 2014 and withdrawn 2 years later. It was resubmitted and then refused by the borough in 2017. It then went to appeal twice and granted after 2 reports from the government inspectors, firstly in May 2018 and then in June 2019. We all agree this should not be going ahead, but I've bullet pointed suggestions for the committee, and we'll say page and paragraph numbers so everyone can follow along, but I only have 5 minutes, so I'll be moving fast. So page 93.59. Condition 4 of the second appeal, which is dated the 24th of April 2018 by Kay Stevens, says application for the approval of reserved matters shall be in accordance with the parameters set on the illustrative master plan. However, this particular inspector's condition has not been met because their clear change in layout with a significant reduction in the land available for the maintenance of the existing watercourse on the northern boundary of the site. The maintenance of this watercourse is significant because it will be required to prevent a recurrence of flooding that happened in this particular watercourse some 30 years ago. We're all aware of the potential for flooding is increasing as climate changes, and with the increased house building happening in and around Ruddington, we are still uncertain as to how the subsequent runoff will affect our drainage system. As stated in the late representation, the developers are proposing to make a significant reduction to the space allowed for this particular watercourse from 10 metres to somewhere between 5 and 6 metres, therefore not allowing for the recommended 10 metre required for proper maintenance. I ask the committee to insist on the recommended 10 metre buffer between the 2 housing developments as approved by the planning inspector at the planning appeal. Page 85.27. Please ask the developers to reconsider the placement of the proposed play area away from the balancing pond. Page 84.26, as stated on page 96.72, this development has no obligation to make any SIL contributions, and yet, as stated on page 84, the additional demand of the 403 extra residents will not be met by our existing provision. With an increased approximately of 200 cars, the 2018 planning inspector, Mr. Nick Fagan, concluded that the proposed development would not result in severe residual cumulative impact on the local highway network, provided that traffic lights, which none of us want, were installed at the junction of Kirk Lane, Charles Street and the High Street. He conditioned the approval to suit it, as it was accepted that these works were not to be carried out, unless this traffic system was put in place. But at two community consultations, the developer has suggested that these lights were no longer in the plan, as they were so unpopular with local businesses that will lose on-street parking in front of their shops and commuters who will lose a bus stop on their high street. As stated by the inspector, the building of this development hinges on those traffic lights at the spot in the village. I'm not convinced that this issue has been resolved, and I would like assurances in the future that this is brought to this committee at some stage. Page 91.51. The parking measures are not wholly clear, and I would request more information since this is an issue of layout. There's no mention of bike paths, despite the condition of bike storage in the houses. Page 91.52, there is no specification of the size or the species of planting, despite this being a landscaping being part of reserved matters, which incidentally was only submitted 3 weeks ago, on the 20th of Jan, 2020. This vagueness is worrying and needs detailing because there's no other opportunity for this committee to see or comment on landscaping. The landscape plan shows trees in the balancing pond, and a new tree proposed under an already existing tree on the eastern boundary of the development, which would not be permitted as it's in the root protection zone of the existing tree. By passing this tonight, the committee will be allowing landscaping of this site to go ahead with very, very loose guidelines. The backlash against this particular development isn't NIMBYism. The residents understand the need for housing, but they've been trying to raise legitimate concerns. And there's a viable alternative, and that's the road around the
I've got to cut you off. Sorry, rules are rules.
Thank you,
5 minutes.
thank you.
Goes quickly. Well, sometimes it goes slowly, but it also can go quickly. But thank you very much. Got those clearly. So we heard from Mr. Collins on behalf of the applicant and Councillor Walker. If you want to pick up on those now, some of Councillor Walker's comments, it has to be said, you won't be able to refer to because I must remind committee that we are a non-political committee. It's very important to note that. So forget politics with a big P. We are the planning committee. So I'm sure everyone understands that. But politics aside, would you like to pick up on the points raised both by the applicant and Councillor Walker, please?
Yes, Chairman. I'm going to ask my colleague just to check through the conditions. I seem to recall there was one about landscaping, but he will come back to me on that in just a moment. Chairman, just going through the various points. Still with the issue of, yes, it is. Condition 3, Chairman, deals with landscaping. So the original submission was accompanied by a landscape strategy plan. That was dated 20th of January. No, I'm sure there was a previous one to that. The latest one is a revision, Chairman. It's a revision A to the landscaping plan. So the strategy is set by the strategy plan. The requirement is that, as I said, existing trees and hedgerows around the boundary are retained. There are currently, as you saw in the photographs, no trees within the site because it was previously agricultural land and tended. So the condition will require the details of the species, girth, precise location, etc. But as I say, if I go to back to that plan, it does set the tone of that landscaping. No, it's not that one. It's that one, yeah. So again, it shows you trees planted within open space areas, trees around the open space and adjacent to the attenuation basin. Chairman, the issue of the buffer strip along the northern boundary of the site, the condition of the outline said that the reserved matters shall be submitted in accordance with the illustrative master plan. And I think the key there is illustrative. The illustrative master plan did include a strip of land along this northern boundary. That was scaled by me at around about 10 metres. The current plan before you does reduce the width of that to approximately 5 or 6 metres. The nearest built development, nearest house effectively, would be the bungalows that would be within 7.5 metres of the bungalow, of the boundary, sorry. There is, we've established, Chairman, there is running through the gardens, the back gardens of the properties to the north on Musters Road, there is a culverted watercourse. And we've sought to clarify the nature of that watercourse. I understand that the top of the watercourse is not far below the level of the surface. Clearly, the applicants own number 75 and have been able to do some investigations with regard to this watercourse. It's apparently 1.2 metres deep and about 1.6 metres wide. Relatively shallow. The developers are providing a 6-metre corridor down through here, which your officers consider to be adequate to access and maintain that watercourse. Clearly, Chairman, normally the requirement is that there is a easement across the top of that watercourse, including gardens which form, are to the properties on Musters Road. So it's not solely reliant on this strip of land, Chairman. Chairman, the conditions in the section 106 on the outline still bite on this development. There is still a requirement for the developer to submit a scheme for improvements to junctions within the village. The difference is between the two appeals, there was talk of traffic lights. My understanding, Chairman, when you look at the condition on the most recent appeal, it doesn't specifically refer to traffic lights. It simply says a scheme to be submitted. That scheme would not be brought back to this committee. It would be subject of consultation with the Highway Authority, who are the technical consultees for any highway improvements. And I think, Chairman, that probably does address all the issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it does. So we need to start discussing and, there's red light on. Councillor Beardsall, first again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was really pleased to hear that this development, and I think everyone will agree with me, is retaining some existing trees. I just wondered, will those trees have a TPO put on them for future protection?
Chairman, we wouldn't normally automatically TPO trees as a result of a planning application. There are conditions which seek to ensure that those trees are retained and protected throughout the course of the development. So they would have to put up fencing around or exceeding the route protection zone to ensure that the trees are not damaged by construction traffic or movements in that area. Chairman, sorry, one point I did neglect to mention that Councillor Walker raised in terms of, she made the point that this development not SIL compliant. Chairman, the council adopted the community infrastructure levy on the 7th of October this year, so any permissions granted prior to that would not be subject to SIL. This is a reserved matter application, so again, it doesn't bite on a reserved matter application where the outline was granted prior to the SIL being adopted. However, Chairman, there is a section 106 associated with the outline permission, which does require payments for, again, things like education, health, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that's helpful.
It is helpful, but am I on? Yes, it is helpful, but I am slightly concerned still that moving forward, once the development's complete, what protects the trees? Because
Chairman, the general requirements for the making of a tree preservation order are that, firstly, the tree has to provide some amenity value, and I'm not disputing that any of the trees around the boundary of the site provide any amenity value. They also have to be at risk. Now, as I say, during the development process, there's conditions to retain those trees around the boundary and measures to protect them. Once the development is completed, arguably there would be no risk or limited risk to those trees. As I say, we don't automatically put a tree preservation order on trees just because there's been development in the area. And I'm going to do it again, sorry, Chairman, because there was one other point that Councillor Walker raised, and that was in relation to the play area. The the play area is in this location here. It is relatively close to the attenuation basin. However, Chairman, we sought to clarify that point with the developers. The requirements of your community development manager is that it should be in an area which is well surveyed by neighbouring properties, easily accessible to the dwellings on the site. The clarification has been sought. The proposal, Chairman, is to provide a knee rail around this area. The play area would potentially be enclosed as well when we get the details of that, but a knee rail around this area. 90% of the time, there's a likelihood that the attenuation basin will be dry. It only there serves as a mitigation measure when there is a flood event, potentially. I understand the advice is that the health and safety type people don't like to see necessarily these areas enclosed by fencing, because if someone does get in and does get into trouble, if there's water in there, no one can see it and get in there to rescue them. So the proposal is for a knee rail around that area. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do know there's other developments around the borough that's been put up in the last few years that have these ponds, and they make them into a bit of a feature. And rarely do they have fences around them. Yeah. The banks, you see them going down into. Right, Councillor Thomas, please.
As far as the balancing ponds are concerned, some of them look attractive, but some of them can be very steep. And quite dangerous for children, even if there's no water in them, although a knee rail can help with that. So I'm pleased to hear that that's in the plans. When Mr Pegram said that when we get the details for the fencing of the leap, is that something that's in the conditions to be provided? So there will be a fence round the play area. Is that the plan, or is that what you'll be looking for when those details come in?
I think the answer is yes. But
Chairman, there's a requirement for the provision of a scheme for the play area, including the equipment that goes in it, so that will be dealt with through the discharge of the conditions. Thank you.
Is it the equipment and the fencing? Okay.
Normally, I've seen other similar examples. They're the metal hoop type fencing around it.
Right. And the other issue I was going to raise is the emergency access off Asher Lane, how that's going to be managed.
Chairman, if I can refer you to the late representations, I should have referred to it at the start. We are recommending an additional condition, should members be minded to approve the application, that there is a scheme submitted for the regulation of that access. For members' interest, it's down in this point here. It's an emergency access, so we're looking for a scheme for effectively controlling and regulating that. Could be a collapsible bollard or something of that nature, so it's not used by the general public, but could be used in the event of an emergency if, for instance, the emergency vehicle couldn't get in from the north.
Page 4, item 3 on your late representations is in there. Okay. No other indicators at this stage. Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, 2 points, one of which has just been covered, the Asher Lane access. The affordable housing is the other point I would like to make. They appear to be bunched together somewhat. I think we need to be avoiding ghetto-like areas, to be quite honest, and whilst perhaps aesthetically they may not be obvious, we just got to be conscious of the potential tenants who may feel separated in some way. I think pepper potting through the development is probably more acceptable. Thank you.
Anything to add on that? Really, there isn't anything.
Have to consider what's before you,
we do, yeah. We have what is in front of us to consider and decide on. Did you want to come back on that? Okay, right. And Councillor Goland, please.
I want to bring up the play area again. I can see there is another area on the site, so I'd like us to make a condition the play area is actually moved away from the pond to the other area at the other side of that sort of top patch of housing, or anywhere really, but not next to the pond. I don't think there's a condition for electric charging points in here, as there was for the last one. I'd like to ask that we include that. I looked through, I couldn't see it, maybe I'm wrong.
I think there is actually on condition number 2. Yeah. The scheme shall provide details of the provision of electric vehicle charging points to serve each dwelling on the site. etc.
Yeah,
Page
okay, sorry.
98.
Yeah, this is a different format to the previous one.
There's a lot to read.
Yeah.
The moving of the playground, we're not powered to do that, are we?
Chairman, we have already had discussions, because this was raised during the representation stage. I think Councillor Gowan may be referring to this area here. That's not a play area.
No, I wasn't. I was referring to the leak.
Okay, you're talking about this one up here. That's all right. I just want to clarify in case you thought that was a play area. It's not. As I say, we had discussions, Chairman. I've discussed it with our community development manager. He is satisfied with the location of that. As I say, they would normally require it's well surveyed. It's well surveyed by these properties here. It's well accessed on this footpath link. So I say you have to consider what is before you, but that has been considered during the process. And as I say, the NERA was introduced as a safety measure for that purpose to a certain extent.
And it is the community safety people who have been in discussion and agreed to it, basically. So that the professionals, the experts, are happy with the proposal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll have it minuted that I'm not.
What? No, okay.
And the
No,
TPOs
we, well, for information, when it comes to minutes, it doesn't go into that
That's
sort of
fine,
detail.
okay.
But your point is noted.
Yeah, thank
Point
you.
is noted.
And finally, on the TPOs, I would have thought that any tree is at risk when a new housing development is placed around it. So I would have thought that by definition, all of these trees are now at risk. New people will move in. They'll want their gardens the way they want them. The trees must be at risk.
But conversely, of course, a lot of people plant trees in their gardens, don't they? Councillor Purdue-Horan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our colleagues will appreciate that we scrutinised this dry previously. In fact, I think I was the mover to refuse on at least one occasion. But we are where we are. I'm still not convinced about the whole thing, but we're not going to win this one, and I'm going to move that we approve this evening.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Purdue-Horan. So you're moving the recommendations as per the report. Have you got a seconder at this stage? Oh, Councillor Thomas, you're seconding that. Do you want to make any other comments, or are you just happy to second? Right. We've had it moved and seconded then. Does anyone else wish, before we go to a decision on this, okay, was there anyone indicated to speak? Councillor Verdi, are you waving at me? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have had a proposal. We've had a seconder as well, but I think Councillor Thomas just beat me to it. But I was just going to really reiterate the point that the outline planning permission was granted. We're looking at reserved matters in terms of accessibility, highways agency requirements and suggestions. That's been widened to 6.75 metres. We've had the density issue addressed in terms of the housing mix and 30.3, I believe. So I think in terms of the reserved matters, including the landscaping and the trees, condition 3, I think Mr. Pegram reminded us. I'm more than happy to not second anymore, but I think move to go to some vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that's very clear. I think we've had a good discussion. This has been a long journey, this particular application. It's been going on for literally years, one way and another. And one day it might be held up as an example as to how planning system works, whether it's, you think, is a good or way or bad way, because it started off with us, the council being against it, and then going to appeal, then coming back again. So it's been scrutinised and looked at very, very closely. Sorry, I'm waffling. We better go to a decision. So we better have a show of hands, please. Those in favour of the application, please show your hands. Got those? Anyone against? 2, no abstentions. So that would be 9. So that's 9 in favour, 2 against. So permission is granted as per the report and recommendation. So thank you. We've been sitting here for just over 2 hours now. I know we've got quite a couple of other important applications, but I'm conscious of the fact that we might be seizing up a bit. Would we like a little comfort break, a short one, for about 7 minutes, take us to 9:15? Is that okay? So we're going to take a comfort break, and we'll be back at 9:15. Okay, thank you. Right, are we all back? I think we are, aren't we? So thank you everyone for your patience, but it's important people have a little break. Right, our next application tonight is land at the former RAF Newton, and this is a variation to various conditions of an existing outline planning application. And I think Mr. Taylor, please, if you lead on this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members are advised that late reps have been received for this application. They're in the papers before you. The proposal before members tonight is a Section 73 application, sometimes written or referred to as an S73 application. It's a type of application that seeks to vary conditions attached to an existing planning permission, and in this instance it's planning permission reference 16/02864 VAR. The amendments are predominantly to conditions that make reference to a design and access statement and or an illustrative master plan, as this permission seeks to vary both of those documents to primarily relocate the village centre on the previously approved development more centrally within the village rather than just centrally within the application site, to remove the approved bus gate, to consolidate the play areas into one location at the northern edge of the site, and to fell a number of protected trees across the site. The agenda papers set out the requested alterations and the affected conditions in detail at paragraph 6, and the site's planning history is detailed within the report as well. However, members' attention is drawn to the fact that the site has extant planning permission and the 2016 application is still valid, and as such forms a fallback position that should be given weight in your determination of this application. It's also noteworthy that the application seeks to amend conditions on an outline permission where all matters are currently reserved. Therefore, the detailed design, access, layout, scale, landscaping of the site are reserved for future consideration. The Ward and Parish Council have both objected to the proposal, and I'm aware that the Ward Council is registered to speak. The Parish Council object to the removal of the bus gate unless the issue of drainage beneath Wellington Avenue is resolved. Nottingham County Council as Highway Authority initially objected to the removal of the bus gate, but following further modelling and updates to the transport assessment at their request, they do not object any longer, and it's also notable that the Borough Council's Design and Landscape Officer also does not object to the proposal before members tonight. The policies relevant to the determination are clearly stated in the paper, so I won't repeat those. The two main issues largely raised by this application relate to the removal of the bus gate and the resultant increase in traffic flow, and in turn the traffic's potential impact or accelerated damage to the drains beneath Wellington Avenue and the loss of protected trees on the site. 34 letters of objection have been received, citing a number of issues. However, members are advised that over 90% of those objections raise the issue of the development's potential impact on 4 surface water drains that lie beneath the surface of Wellington Avenue, and that are currently the responsibility of 134 properties that make up the Trenchard Close, the Trenchard Close Residence Company Limited. Members are advised that the area in question, i.e. Wellington Avenue and the drains beneath it, are located outside of the red line of this application. The Borough Solicitor has advised that the presence of drains is a material consideration. However, very little weight should be afforded to the matter, as Wellington Avenue is built to an adoptable standard. Traffic regulation order prohibiting HGVs from accessing the site is proposed as part of the application, along with conditions that serve to prevent vehicles over 3.5 tonnes leaving the employment area of the site via Wellington Avenue, and the Section 106 agreement pursuant to the existing permission also secures a traffic calming contribution. The presence of drainage beneath the highway is not uncommon, and the highway is not only built to the standard required for it to be formally adopted by the Highway Authority, but it is actually formally adopted by them as well. The adopted standard serves to protect the premature erosion of the carriageway and of any utilities located beneath it. Members are again reminded that the Highway Authority are no longer objecting to the proposal, subject to the conditions set out in the report. A number of the objections received also relate to the loss of 83 TPO trees across the site as a result of the proposal. Again, at the risk of hammering the point home, I would remind members that the application is for a revision to an outline permission and that landscaping details are reserved for future consideration. However, it's fully acknowledged that the application specifically refers to the felling of TPO trees across the site. Previous applications, and indeed the current extant valid permission, were made by landowners, whereas the current proposal is largely developer-led, and therefore, as part of this application, there is a greater degree of certainty regarding the layout, despite the fact that the application is outline form. Current developer has calculated that if all the trees currently protected on the site were to be retained, this would loss in the result of about 120 dwellings from the scheme, or 20% of the site, based on the policy allocation for 550 dwellings within the core strategy. It's also notable that not all the TPO trees are necessarily specifically shown on the currently approved master plan. Officers and the applicants acknowledge that the loss of TPO trees is regrettable, and members will be aware of the Council's corporate priorities, which includes the environment. However, the application does indicate that the protected trees that are lost as a result of the proposal would be replaced on a 2-for-1 basis, and in addition, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 new trees will be planted across the rest of the site to further offset their loss. It's acknowledged that the TPO trees on the site are mature, and the applicant also proposes that of the 83 trees lost, they would be replaced with 166 semi-mature trees, but again, this is a reserved matter. Nevertheless, the Borough Council's Design and Landscape Officer does not object to the proposal and comments that the protected trees and landscape issues will be assessed as part of any subsequent reserved matters submissions. They also acknowledge that the access road needs to be widened, as the site access road needs to be widened, it makes sense for the trees on its southern side to be sacrificed to retain the trees along its northern side for the existing properties. Councillors must ultimately weigh the loss of the trees across the site against the efficient use of a brownfield site, which is a strategic allocation of up to 550 dwellings and currently benefits from outline planning permission. The relocation of the community centre to the northeastern part of the site, so that they're more central within the village, and the consolidation of formal and informal play areas to the northern edge of the site are not considered to be contentious, and the relevant consultees have not objected to these elements within the proposal. Members are reminded that they have to assess the proposal before them, but it's the officer's professional opinion that the proposed amendments to the conditions would still result in an acceptable development, and it would have an acceptable relationship to the neighbouring land uses, subject to the conditions set out in the report and in the late representations. If members do recommend approval, the actual number, scale, positioning and form of any dwellings and the landscaping will be matters that will be determined as part of any subsequent reserved matters submissions. Therefore, members are advised that although the report is lengthy and appears complex, in simple terms, it's a variation to the approved outline conditions that would permit a new illustrative master plan and shows the relocation of the central community facilities, the removal of the bus gate, the loss of some TPO trees and some play areas being relocated. As a point of clarification, a deed of variation would also be required to link the current proposal to the previously agreed position regarding contributions via the Section 106 agreement, and that would include the provision of primary school on the site amongst other factors. If I can just take members on a short guided tour around the site. For those less familiar with the site, I'm going to start at the end of Wellington Avenue, which is the old access into the MOD base and serves the original MOD housing around here. The employment land largely sits here. Phase 1, delivered by another developer, is constructed and occupied as residential use here. And this is broadly the area of the site that members are being asked to consider tonight. I'll take members on a walk down Wellington Avenue to approach the entrance to the site. Another series of photographs showing the entrance here, and some photographs within this part of the site that showed the access looking in both directions. So this is the first photograph looking along Wellington Avenue. Again, approaching the entrance to the site, which is roughly where the red dot is now. Turning right, looking into this road here, you've got some of the existing housing, and again looking back on the road you've just walked down. Spinning 180, we approach the entrance to the site, which is largely marked by the oak tree before you on the images, which is to be retained on the illustrative master plan. You'll notice the water tower, still one of the few buildings that still remains constructed on the site, with the exception of the hangars. The water tower would ultimately be removed as indicated on the master plan. Again, a view of the oak tree and the road structure that serves the employment land behind it. And again, to the right-hand side of that oak tree is the road that serves the hangars, which are partially visible behind this clump of trees here. And again, another view with the water tower as a guide as to the largely cleared nature of the site members are being asked to consider. At the southeastern corner of the site, there is the other access, which is predominantly used for the access for the commercial vehicles into the employment land at the hangars at the moment. Again, just to give members a flavour of this access, currently has an in and an out arrangement. moving along that road, viewed from outside the properties within phase 1 delivered by another developer. You'll notice the access road beneath the canopy of these trees here, being used by lorries. It's the trees on this side of the road that are proposed to be retained. The illustrative master plan appears to indicate that the trees on the far side of that road that would be lost as a result of their revised layout. Again, looking in the other direction back towards the hangars, and again an indication of the housing within phase 1. Phase 1 is, I think it's fair to say, 100% occupied. It's been constructed for a number of years now, and within that development there are green open spaces, walkways around part of the perimeter of the site, and a recently constructed play area which I think was provided by the parish council. This plan shows the currently approved illustrative master plan. The key features that change are this central area here, which is, I appreciate, not clear on this plan here, but shows village centre, I think is how it's annotated, and the community centre up here. There's also a couple of, I think there's one junior and one toddler play area that are shown away from the predominant play area, which is at the northern end of the site, and there would have been a bus gate here. The red dots indicate the approximate location of TPO trees within the site, and you'll notice that the orange wash indicates where residential properties would be located, so it's fair to say that under the current approved layout, the current approved illustrative master plan, not all the protected trees on the site would be retained. The area where the final photographs were stood outside the properties looking where that HGV was coming into the site is roughly where the red dot on the site is now. You'll notice that the access road was in a slightly different location to the next series of plans I'll show you, which are the ones before members for consideration this evening. Also, by point of reference, this is Wellington Avenue, which sits outside of the red line, both on the currently approved illustrative master plan and on the plan before members tonight, where the drainage I previously referred to is located. So this is the plan before members tonight. The village centre has been located on the plan to this location, so it's the developer's intention to have it more central within the wider village of Newton rather than more central within the allocation. I appreciate again the annotations aren't specifically clear on this, but the bus gate is proposed to be removed from this location, and rather than having pockets of play area that may cater to different age groups within the development, the developer's proposing to have all the play spaces located within the northern edge of the site, so if families have children of various ages, they can be supervised by less than one guardian whilst they play in the area. There's also indications of trim trail around the edge of the site and connections through formalised, because these have informally been created, walkways through the woodland area, be formalised, that connect through to the play space I showed you in the lights, which is roughly here, would also serve to extend the proposed orbital route around the edge of the site to probably 90% of its extent, with the exception of this small area where you would need to come in on residential roads before you connect back in away from highway traffic. Application has included a phasing plan. The applicants have indicated that it's their intention to start the site from two ends, so two sales centres running concurrently. So the pink areas are what they are proposing in terms of residential to be delivered first, the blue areas to follow suit, so they would work from the outer edges into the middle, as it were. And again, that's a detailed layout plan for the site. Officers are satisfied that the proposal is in accordance with policies within the local plan. The members are, however, advised that, subject to the revisions stated in the late representations, subject to the prior signing of a deed of variation, and subject to the conditions set out in the report, officers are satisfied that the proposal is acceptable and are therefore recommending approval on that basis.
Okay, thank you very much. We have three speakers on this item. The first is Sarah Alsop, who is the agent on behalf of the applicant. So welcome. And as you've seen, up to 5 minutes to talk to us when you press the right hand button. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm actually the planning manager at Red Row Homes. Rather than sit here and go into too much detail, which is clearly outlined in the committee report, we've prepared a short video which we hope kind of provides, as developer, the vision for the site and what we're hoping to achieve through this application and subsequent reserve matters. So I think it's ready to play.
Welcome to RAF Newton, Newton Garden Village. Redrow has agreed a deal to acquire the former RAF Newton site with the intention of delivering a garden village development, building aspirational places to live naturally. At Redrow, we believe in building better places to live. Our passion for design, sustainability, innovation and people ensures we bring this vision to life in every one of our garden village developments across the UK. Our extensive experience helps us to understand the wants and needs of growing communities, and this unique insight ensures we're always improving in what we do. Our distinctive high-quality homes are woven within the fabric of community amenities and with stunning natural settings to form a whole new place for people to live. We are passionate about what we do, and we hope Newton Garden Village will inspire the next generation of house builders and form new communities that provide people with a better way to live. In order to realise the vision, a number of changes to the existing outline permission have been proposed through the S73 application presented at tonight's committee. One of the key changes to the master plan is the removal of the bus gate, helping to bring both existing and proposed communities together. Associated with this are a number of additional highway measures, including a traffic regulation order to restrict HGV movements along Wellington Avenue. The highway modelling undertaken has demonstrated there to be no significant impact on the surrounding highway network. We have also provided a comprehensive landscaping scheme with over 6,000 new trees to be planted, and key to the scheme, a semi-mature tree-lined boulevard through the entire development, mitigating for the loss of the TPOs on a 2-for-1 basis. Also included within this application, there is a continuing commitment to deliver the footbridge cycleway over the A46 and the community hall. We are working alongside the Parish Council to bring forward the detail associated to the hall. Our revised master plan for Newton Garden Village embodies Redrow's 8 placemaking principles. Listening and engaging with local communities and other stakeholders at an early stage informs our proposals and shapes our vision. Understanding the unique and important characteristics of the site and its locality helps us to create a distinctive and responsive sense of place. Providing an easy-to-navigate development with connections to the existing community and local employment produces a healthy, vibrant and sustainable place to live. Contributing to the creation of thriving and balanced communities and delivering homes in locations that are well connected to local employment and facilities. Enhancing existing and creating new wildlife habitats and connecting people to these places through thoughtful design enriches the environment on so many levels. Recognising the street as an essential part of creating healthy, safe, attractive and friendly places to live creates a place where neighbours can flourish. Delivering sustainable and socially cohesive communities by providing a diverse mix of housing types and tenures means everyone feels welcome. Making a lasting impression by building beautiful homes in carefully designed communities delivers places people are proud to be part of and have a true sense of belonging. If the S73 is approved at tonight's committee, we hope to deliver homes by the start of 2021 and simultaneously bringing forward the community assets.
Oh, that was bang on 5 minutes, wasn't it? I thought it was going to go on and on. We're getting quite sort of, we're not used to this high-tech video. So thank you for that, and thank you for your comments and presentation. Our next speaker on this is Margaret Goulder, who is objecting to the application. So if you'd like to come and join us, please. And you've seen how it works. It's the right-hand button, the red light will come on and we'll start counting down. Thank you.
Since 2004, I've been the chairperson of the Trenchard Close Residence Company Limited. Whilst the company supports this planning variation, we do object to the removal of the bus gate as it can financially impact the company's shareholders. In 2009, a liaison group was formed to discuss the development of the whole of the RAF site. During these meetings, it was agreed a bus gate could be implemented to safeguard the drains under Wellington Avenue. The councillors who attended these meetings were from borough, county and parish, and also Hunter Page Planning representing Newton Nottingham LLP. They all appreciated the cost should not be borne by only 146 residents. It was thought that the increase in traffic from phase 1 being only 164 properties would not put the same accumulated tonnage over the road that including phase 2 would. It was not part of the planning process, but to make the site more attractive for sale, the drains were relined by Newton Nottingham LLP, but this lining only has a life of approximately 15 to 20 years. Prior to the implementation of the Water and Waste Management Act of 2010, our company spent approximately £25,000 replacing just one foul drain that ran under a short section of Fairway Crescent but the full width of Wellington Avenue. As I understand it, the documents available from the planning officers advise that the drains under Wellington Avenue are not to be considered when it comes to removing the bus gate. The borough did not approach the residents' company for any information. Unfortunately, a report published on the planning portal was wholly inaccurate, but was removed after I'd contacted Paul Taylor. Unfortunately, numerous people had read it, believing it to be true. The report gives the impression that the residents' company are only responsible for 4 drains, when in fact we are responsible for the surface water drains across the whole of the estate. The drains under Wellington Avenue cannot be repaired, as this has already been done, so they would need complete replacement, which based on today's prices would be £20,000 per drain, all paid for by 146 residents. I ask that you look again at this situation. As noted in your documents, it says, the private ownership of the surface water drainage is less common. Therefore, the whole situation is less common, and would appreciate it if you could treat it as such. Also, could the bus gate remain and be reviewed again at a future date? Thank you.
Right, thank you. That was well within time. Thank you. I've got those notes, I think, got those points. And our final speaker on this one is the local ward member, Councillor Sims, please.
Thank you. Can you not start the time yet because I've got to make an announcement?
No, I'll start the clock as soon as you press. As soon as you start speaking and press the right red button.
I'm ward councillor for East Bridgeford.
Indeed. Yes. Yeah. You are the ward councillor. Yeah.
I live in Newton.
Ah.
The boundary of the Newton development. So I just thought I'd make that clear to the committee.
So you're local.
So Newton means a lot to me.
Okay. I think we've got that. Thank you.
Okay. First and foremost, I must say that was a great presentation video. It really impressed me, absolutely. And I'm very keen on this development to go ahead. But make no shadow of a doubt, this will be great for the community of Newton and the greater community. But it needs to go ahead in the right way. We need to make grown-up decisions, not just financial decisions. We need to make responsible decisions. This council is all about the environment. Since I've joined in May, we have so many environmental initiatives. So we need to stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. More than 80 trees with TPOs, trees that are 100 years old up to, with a habitat in them, with endangered bat species within them, that we just want to discard them without thought of that environment. The environment, we all know we're burning down. I really do think that we should think carefully about this before we just throw these trees away. We can't replace 100-year-old trees with replacement 2-for-1s. Otherwise, let's go around the whole borough, chop all the trees down and replace them with 3 trees, new trees. It is not right what this is happening. This has not been thought out properly. The developers have never really consulted properly with the community of Newton, in my opinion, and they haven't taken into consideration the environment. The environment these days is so important to our children and our grandchildren. And if we make a decision to chop these trees down tonight, this is a shameful act by, in my view, of this Borough Council. We need to do something. Yeah? I think the bus gate, in principle, I'm all for the bus gate being removed. Newton is a very divided community and it needs to be removed. However, we need to remove it after forethought, not just removing it and then think after. We really need to have cognizance of what Margaret's just said. It is her, they say they're shareholders. These are not shareholders of corporate companies. These are people that live in a house, the former RAF houses. They need to be thought about, and their pockets need to be thought about, because if those drains do collapse because HGVs have used Wellington Avenue as a cut through to the industrial estate, then who pays for it? They've got to pay for it. And that is something that we really need to consider. Like I said, I'm really keen, and the community is really keen to move this project forward. We need to move Newton forward, but we need to consider how we move Newton forward. It has got such rich history for the area. A resident was just telling me she was there when Princess Anne planted a tree over 50 years ago. I don't know whether that tree is due to be cut down, but that is the sort of history that we've got at Newton. So I would ask colleagues to consider very, very carefully the decisions they make if they're going to proceed tonight, and I would ask them to reject this application and ask the developers to move forward and put a different scenario in. They can do it. They just need to think about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Sims. Well, within 5 minutes, so thank you for that. Or could you just turn the switch off? Because otherwise it's going to get even more chaotic with the microphones, I suspect. Thank you. So we've heard from Sarah Alsop on the video, and Margaret Goulder, who was telling us about the drains, or the concerns about the drains and the impact on them and their responsibility for them, and Councillor Sims we've just heard as well. So Mr Taylor, would you like to pick up on those points, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Within the report, it's quite clear what the legal view for the Borough Council is with regard to the drainage on the site. I think it's paragraph 73 of my report, and I'll just double check, but the view is it is a private matter. I appreciate that's not news that's well received, but that is the planning position in relation to the application before you. With regards to whether the bus gate could remain and be reviewed at a later date, it's been said a number of times this evening, the application before you is the application members have to consider. The application proposes removing the bus gates. Members must make their decision based on that application alone. With regards to the loss of the TPO trees, as set out in my presentation, this application is developer-led, therefore it indicates what the layout is more likely to be, and therefore arguably provides clarity to members about where the trees might be lost across the site. On the plan on the screen at the moment, it does show a number of trees within this area. I appreciate the colour contrast is probably not great on the screen, even though sat close to the screen, but a number of trees within this location and within this location as well to be lost. The same is true on the illustrative master plan that currently has permission. Again, that the illustrative layout, and I do emphasise that word on purpose, shows that there would be trees lost as a result of the approved situation that benefits from planning permission at the moment. Don't disagree that the environment's important. It is incredibly important. Appreciate that results in the loss of mature trees. Within the video presentation, it showed the scale of the trees that the developer is proposing to plant on the site. They're not just simply sticks in tubes. They are semi-mature trees of significant scale. and you can see on the plan in front of you the indicative layout of how the scheme would be put before you. I would also reiterate the point that landscaping is a reserved matter.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll go on to discussions now then, please, and debate. So who would like to start on this, please? Councillor Brennan is the name on here. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I on? Yes. Well, very interesting. Firstly, I'd like to say that I also, echoing Councillor Sims' comments, fully support the development of housing on this site. This is exactly the sort of site that we want to be bringing forward. It's much preferable to agreeing houses on greenbelt land. It's brownfield land. It's sustainable. And I think it's a fabulous scheme, and the presentation looked great. However, as the point's been made, we have declared a climate emergency. We have a free tree scheme. We give trees to our residents to try to encourage trees planting across the borough. And yet here we are being asked to remove a condition that imposed TPOs on 83 trees and the attempted resiting of a further 5 trees. And I just find it an astonishing request. I have very little objection to any of the other conditions, but this one, I think there does reach a point where you have to draw a line. And I think the developer is making the case that retaining these trees will prevent the construction of 120 houses. Well, go back and reconfigure the plans, because I'm sure it can be worked around if we need those 120 houses. And there's an inference in the paperwork that if we don't build those 120 houses here, we'll have to find a site somewhere else. Well, almost every application that comes to us has asked for an uplift in houses. We've already agreed an extra 37 already this evening. So I don't think that's a major problem. I think the developer is trying to incrementally remove the conditions that were put on the original outline approval, and I think they should go back and reconfigure their plans. I don't see the point in a TPO if we can just come back and say, well, actually now it's not very convenient, it's going to affect our profit margins, so we'd like to remove them all. And I don't think that planting 2 saplings, even if they're mature saplings, mature-ish saplings, is going to do anything to replace the trees that are going to be removed. And as I said, I wouldn't object to any of the other conditions that were placed being changed, removed, altered to configure this site effectively, but I do object to the removal of the TPOs.
Okay, well, you've made your position very clear on that. I probably no need to come back on that at this stage. We'll, and as you've quite rightly pointed out, although there's a lot of conditions in here, there are the 3 main points that we're discussing. There's the bus gate, the moving of the community hall or facilities, and the felling of the trees. So, Councillor Beardsall, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am absolutely gobsmacked. We've seen aerial pictures of the site with all the trees, very mature trees. They look beautiful. And yet, we hear earlier on from the planning officers the importance of TPOs on a previous application, or just discussion how important TPOs are. And here we are now, not knocking down some trees, we use the word some, we're knocking down a lot of trees. We're going to remove 89 trees. 89 trees with TPOs on. I won't repeat a lot of what's been said by my colleague over there, but it's absolutely not acceptable. This is a council, and I'm sure all the members that are here would agree, we are a council that are environmentally friendly. We're trying to be carbon neutral. We're doing lots of things with trees around the borough, and yet we're going to knock down 89 TPO trees. Some of them are 100 years old, some of them, I don't know what species they are, but I guess that some of them are quite varied in species, and all of the wildlife that is associated with those trees. I'm no expert, but I know enough to know that, you know, you knock down a mature tree, you're affecting quite a lot of wildlife. So 89 is not acceptable at all. In terms of the other aspects of this application, I don't really have any disagreement with. You know, I'm fully in agreement with developing a garden environment development, but it's clear to me here that this is just about making as much profit as I can, so I'm going to knock these trees down. And it's completely in divergence to what the video, the very slick video, which was very well produced, said. So, on that basis, I'm not going to mess about. We should not accept knocking down 89 trees, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to move that this application is rejected on that basis.
Okay, well that's fine. There are other people who want to come in and speak, of course, but you've made a proposal there to reject. Do you just want to clarify something on this?
Yes, please, Chairman. Just in terms of what Paul alluded to, it's 83 trees that we're talking about. Sorry to be specific, but the other aspect I would also say is that it's already been highlighted that some of those trees, in principle, we've already, to a certain extent, accepted the loss of because they're in the developable. It's not working again. The developable areas. The main focus is really along this road where the trees would be removed that weren't previously identified to be removed. Chairman, this is not just about profit. I have to give a bit of background to this site. This site has had numerous applications on it. There's a previous variation to the original consent granted. And that application was subject to a viability assessment, which showed that the scheme was borderline viable. And that was scrutinised not only by your officers, but by an external viability consultant. So the loss of 120 houses from the scheme will have a significant impact on the viability and the deliverability of this scheme. So as I say, yes, developers are in a business. They're there to make a profit. I'm not trying to defend them. All I'm saying is that in this instance, I don't think it's solely profit driven. There is an issue about the viability of the scheme and whether or not it would be delivered, and the loss of 20% of the dwellings would have a significant impact on that viability, Chairman. Sadly, these days, it is a material planning consideration as well. Once upon a time, the profit of the developer didn't matter. These days, deliverability of schemes and viability is a material planning consideration. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Right, thank you for the clarification on that. Yes, you can come back, Councillor Birdsall.
Thank you. We've used the word some again. Oh, no, it's okay, right, great. We've used the word some again. Some of the trees were TPO and some of them were already agreed to be removed on a previous planning application, I think is what you were saying. Indicated. Can you quantify some? Because it could be 3 out of 83. It makes a big difference.
I think it's more than 3, Chairman. I'm comfortably
a figure,
say
please.
that, but yeah.
Could we have a figure? No. Okay.
Right. Okay. But it is indicative, isn't it? So, the point taken. Yeah. Councillor Goland. Sorry, was it Councillor
Thomas?
Oh, I'm sorry. This list thing. Councillor Thomas was the first light that came on, but I will come to you. Don't worry.
Thank you. I think it's inevitable that some trees will have to be lost in order to deliver this scheme. And if they're not lost here, reducing the number of houses that can be built on this site, then trees will probably have to be lost somewhere else. What's concerning me about the trees, and that might be something that Mr. Pegram can explain, is why they're being, the TPOs are being taken off at this stage in the application. The reserved matters will provide the detailed layouts for these areas, and the layouts could change between now and then, and indeed different trees might need to come down. So I don't understand, and in fact the site could take 7 years, 10 years to develop while those trees are providing a valuable environmental consideration. So I don't understand why this is happening at this stage of the development and why it can't happen at the reserved matters stage of the development. Thank you.
We do have an answer, Chairman. basically, as Paul alluded to, the indication is that there is a need to remove 83 trees. Clearly, as he also referred to, layout and landscaping are reserved matters. So that will be scrutinised in more detail when we get the reserved matters in, which will clearly identify those trees to be removed. The other aspect I would say is that we've already said they're planting within the developable area at a ratio of 2:1, which is in accordance with our woodland and tree strategy. And also in that area around the western edge and northern edge of the development, there's further tree planting estimated to be around 6,000 trees. So yes, it is regrettable that we are looking at the potential loss of trees, but there would be significant tree planting taking place on this site. The other issue is, just to come back to a point that Councillor Beardsall raised earlier, this site does have a TPO on it. That TPO was made in 2011. In accordance with the guidance on the making of TPOs, TPOs can be used where a site is coming forward for development, but we don't yet know the final layout and details of that scheme. So a TPO is then placed on the site to protect the trees in the interim, and then obviously once the layout is known, then clearly we know what the impact on tree cover is. So that is a legitimate use of a tree preservation order. That is what you can use it for, other than just to protect a tree in someone's garden because it's nice and they want to potentially chop it down. Thank you, Chairman.
So it's a bit of a technical explanation there, but there is more to TPOs than necessarily most of us as laymen will meet the eye. But do you want to come? You wanted to come back?
So, do the TPOs come off at the reserved matters stage or now?
Chairman, as far as I'm concerned, the actual consent to fell those trees will come through the reserved matters when we know the actual layout and when those trees, or what trees, will need to be removed and when. As you quite rightly point out, they may not all have to come down on day one. Clearly, if the development is phased, some trees might be retained during that development process. But ultimately, if they are shown on a reserved matters layout to be removed, my view is that is the point that overrides the TPO and gives permission for the removal of those trees.
So another stage to come in effect then. Councillor Goland, please.
I actually want to talk about drains, but can you make it quite clear which trees are being removed? I'm looking at both plans. Is it the bottom road? The extra trees that are being removed?
Apologies, technology. This is the approved plan. This is the plan that exists at the moment. This is the plan that has planning permission. And the indication on this, because it is illustrative, because we don't have the details, is that the trees indicated by the orange area, I think it is, I can't, are the ones to be lost. So you've got a number here, a large cluster around this area here. And
But are you saying the ones at the top were already approved to be removed?
Well, you've got these ones here that are also in conflict with the other colour, which is the orange wash.
Oh. Right, okay.
It wouldn't be possible to retain the trees and build the houses. So I can say with a degree of certainty on that illustrative master plan, if it were to be delivered broadly in accordance with that, those trees would be at risk. Potentially these trees here would be at risk. Arguably some of these trees may require some maintenance because the way they're plotted on there is quite close and dense together. Yes, they form a woodland group, but they are potentially competing with each other anyway.
Okay, thank you. So it is unfortunate because they're not just trees, these are groups of trees, they're sort of mini ecosystems. But I actually wanted to bring up the issue of the drains. This sort of relates to the previous issue, I think, at Asher Lane. We've got a drain that belongs to somebody else, which is going to be impacted by the road. And you said it's a private matter, but I can't really understand what's amenity if it's not a financial cost due to people driving over your drain. So what is the position? Why is it that we are able to cause damage to someone else's property where we're not allowed to look in their windows?
An explanation of drains, or the ownership and the responsibility and why.
I'll take this one, Chairman. The advice received is that the highway is built to an adoptable standard. That is the minimum standard that the Highway Authority will consider taking ownership and responsibility of the highway surface, if I can put it in simplistic terms. Think of it as layers of a cake. It has to be built to a certain standard before the Highways Authority will take on the maintenance responsibilities of that road. That road is built to that adoptable standard, and not only is it built to that standard, it is actually adopted by the Highway Authority. So they are responsible for the road, if I can put it in those
not
terms.
for the drain underneath it.
Not the drains underneath, no. However, being built to that standard, the Highway Authority are content that that standard prevents the premature erosion of that highway surface, and by proxy, if you like, it also protects any utilities that are located beneath the layers of those cake. There is also a traffic calming scheme secured through the 106 agreement for the current consent that imposes traffic calming measures around the entire site and actually through the village of Newton itself that would slow the speed of traffic travelling along Wellington Avenue, regardless of what that traffic may be. There's also a proposed traffic regulation order that would prevent HGVs from using the site, and there's also a weight restriction for vehicles coming out of the commercial site to nothing more than 3.5 tonnes being able to travel along Wellington Avenue. It's on that basis that highways officers are satisfied that those measures combined would prevent any evidential damage to those drains that may present a financial burden to their owners.
Chairman, if I can just add as well, Mr Taylor's mentioned a raft of traffic calming measures. Clearly, if the bus gate is removed, it does give people an option. Do they go north or do they go south? The intention of those traffic calming measures is effectively to make the southern exit arguably more attractive still for anyone wanting to access or egress that site. So effectively, although, yes, it would allow free access for residents to go through that way, those measures are aimed at making it more tortuous and arguably more attractive to still come out through the south and use the road network in that area.
I fundamentally understand the reason why the bus gate wants to go, and I agree with it. It's just obviously at some point somebody felt that that road wasn't going to be strong enough, and now suddenly the opinion's changed, or not suddenly, maybe road surfaces have changed. But I do wonder whether there should be a requirement of some kind of bridge over the drains to ensure that they're secure.
I do, Chairman, yes, because the purpose of the bus gate was not to protect the drains under Wellington Avenue. Let's just deal with that issue. Clearly, when we dealt with the initial application, the view of the Highway Authority was that if traffic were to access out this way, at that stage, obviously because of the nature of the highways and also junctions here, that there was a need to limit or restrict vehicle movements. This application is now accompanied by quite a detailed transport assessment, which has been assessed and reassessed, I would add, by the Highway Authority. The Highway Authority are now satisfied that with that additional information, the removal of the bus gate would not give rise to highway safety issues on the wider network or junctions. So just to be clear, it wasn't just about protecting the drains, it was about the wider highway network safety issues.
But bus gates can be a bit of a mystery to people because what does it mean? But now we've had the explanation. It is primarily a highway and for safety purposes. Now, Councillor Thomas, have you indicated to speak again? You're flashing up on here.
May I?
Well, yes.
Thank you.
Because your name's on here.
I'm reassured by the traffic calming measures and the restrictions on HGV traffic about the situation with Wellington Avenue. Although I understand the concerns about the drains, I think the issue here is that the drains need to be adopted, and I think probably the Residents' Association need the support of their county councillor if they're to be adopted by the county council, and perhaps other agencies to get them adopted. I'm reassured by the fact that the TPOs would be left in place effectively until the reserve matter stage, in which case this committee will have another opportunity to try to save the trees, and therefore I move that we accept the recommendation.
Right, thank you for those comments. Have you got a seconder at this stage for that proposal? Councillor Major, you're seconding that. Okay, we've had the recommendation moved and seconded. So there is basically a motion on the table for us to vote on, to make a decision on that. But before we go to that, does anyone else want to say it, to comment, or shall we just go straight to a decision on this? The proposal and the recommendation has been moved and seconded by Councillor Thomas and Councillor Major. Right, let's go to a vote, shall we, on this? So can I have a show of hands of those in favour of the recommendation to approve as per the report? Please show your hands. How many did that? 7? 6. And those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 5 against, and so there'll be obviously no abstentions. So that is approved. Right. Okay. Thank you. But the point being that this will come back for
similar to Asher Lane,
yes,
Chairman. I would add. Yeah.
So this application is not over yet. That's the important point to remember to committee. At some point, it will be coming back for the finer details of what will be requested on the application. Okay, thank you. We have 2 more applications to go, and the next one is Colston Bassett. This is land west of School Lane, Colston Bassett. It's a proposed new dwelling. It's a resubmission of previous applications. And Mr. Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, members are advised that late reps have been received in respect of this planning application. Planning application seeks permission for revisions to the design of a new dwelling that already benefits from full planning permission on a site at School Lane in Colston Bassett. The site is currently undeveloped and is located within the conservation area. Neighbouring building to the east, the Martins Arms Public House, is a Grade 2 listed building, and a number of the neighbouring buildings are also identified as key unlisted buildings in the conservation area appraisal. Application is for a 2-storey dwelling with a basement that would have the form and appearance of a converted barn or farm building to its front public elevation onto School Lane, with a combination of traditional and contemporary elements to its side and rear elevations. It also proposes a vehicular access to the side of the proposed dwelling. Site history details the previous historical refusals for any dwelling on this site, the approval in 2019 and the subsequent refusal of a revised design following that initial grant of permission. Obviously that 2019 consent is still valid and could still be implemented. The Ward Member and Parish Council object to the proposal, and 5 letters of objection and 1 of support have also been received for the reasons set out in your papers, members. The key issue in the determination, or the key issues, I should say, in the determination of this application centre around the design of the dwelling and its relationship to the heritage assets and the impacts on flooding within the village. Borough Council has a long history, as I say, of resisting developments on the site. However, permission was granted last year due to the sensitive design, scale and siting that was considered to respond sympathetically to the constraints of the site. Current proposal is situated slightly further forward in the site than the approved scheme, and the proposed dwelling before members tonight would be 1 metre wider and 0.6 metres higher than the approved scheme. The application also introduces a basement that did not feature as part of the approved scheme. The rear elevation is similar to the refused scheme, with the extent of the differences explained at paragraph 53 of your reports. However, the rear elevation is not considered to be overly visible from the public realm, and it is acknowledged that the rear is more contemporary in its design. Officers acknowledge that the approved scheme is preferable to the application before members tonight. However, the current proposal is not significantly different in terms of impact or appearance on the character and conservation area, and the Borough Council's Conservation Officer is satisfied that the proposal is acceptable and meets the objectives described as desirable in sections 66 and 72 of the Planning and Listed Building and Conservation Act 1990, and specifically noted that the proposal before you tonight is closer to the 2019 permission than the subsequently refused scheme. Your officers are also satisfied that the proposal would not result in harm to the amenity of any of the adjoining occupiers. The local concerns and recent experience of flooding are well documented, and thus the submission also included a drainage report identifying that these issues are not a result of groundwater flooding, and that the proposed basements presents very little risk to groundwater flooding as a result of any subterranean construction. The drainage report references that recent flooding events in the village, which are understood to have been a result of surface water flooding and are as a consequence of high levels of rain falling over a very short period of time. The application site has no experience of flooding events. Surface water flooding is entirely different to groundwater flooding displacement, and thus the proposed basement is not considered to exacerbate any flooding issues previously experienced elsewhere in the village. The site is not within the Environment Agency's flood zone and is more than 60 metres from the River Smite flood zone. Members are also advised that no objections have been received from either the County Council in their capacity as lead local flood authority or from the Environment Agency. Plan on the screen members can see outlined in red indicates the plot in question. The aforementioned listed building, the Martins Arms, is this building here. A number of these buildings are key unlisted buildings within the conservation area appraisal, and the site sits within the conservation area itself. Again, red line shows that there's a significant belt of tree cover to the north-northwest boundary of the site. Buildings, as the plans will indicate, is located roughly where the red dot is on the screen at the moment, and as per the other dwellings, would primarily address the street scene in a linear fashion. Application sites to behind the brick wall here. This is the neighbouring residential property that's recently had an access approved along the boundary with the now application site. This is a view looking towards the Martins Arms public house in this direction, so the site is to the left, just out of shot of this photograph, but gives you a flavour of the residential built form within the site and its immediate context. Turning 180, looking back at the site, this is the first photograph I showed you of that residential barn with its new access. Proposed dwelling to sit in this plot of land here, which has a long frontage onto School Lane. Again, taking a couple of steps backwards just to give a bit more of a wider context, and looking towards the belt of trees here. Access is proposed roughly in this location here where there is an existing form of farm access. Looking across that access, you can see the site has been somewhat reclaimed by nature in recent years. And from within the site, looking back out to School Lane, again, you get a flavour of the built form within the street. This plan here, appreciate it's not the clearest plan in the world. The red outline of this T form here is the approved dwelling, the dwelling that benefits from planning permission at the moment. The blue line, which extends beyond its boundaries, is the recently refused scheme. The planning application before members tonight is the coloured in version in grey and white, but you'll notice it's somewhere between those two parameters. This screenshot shows you the 4 elevations of the proposed dwelling and the layout, including its subterranean basement. And there are 2 useful slides that show a side-by-side comparison with the various elevations as approved, as proposed, and as previously refused. As referenced in the report, you'll notice that the building is 1 metre wider and is 0.6 of a metre higher than the approved scheme, but sits lower than the refused scheme. Similarly, the other 2 elevations. This is the proposed front elevation, the public elevation, if you like, onto School Lane. That's the approved version. That's what members are being asked to consider now. This is the scheme that was previously refused. Given the proposal is for the redesign of an approved dwelling, it's considered to constitute an infill plot within the village. The proposed elevations are not considered to have a significantly greater impact on any heritage asset, nor is the proposed basement considered to impact on the known flooding issues that have recently been experienced in other parts of the village. And subject to the conditions suggested within the report, offers a review that the proposal is acceptable and therefore recommended for approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Now I've got 2 speakers registered for this applicant. I've got Josie McQuirk from Colston Bassett Parish Council and Councillor Cumberlack, who is the Borough Ward member. So, Mrs. McQuirk, if you'd like to join us, please. I'm not allowed. No, sorry. Well, you can hold them, but you're not allowed to come give them to us because it breaks all sorts of rules, and we've, yeah. So, you're perfectly entitled to sort of hold them up, type of thing. Right. Anyway, you have up to 5 minutes to talk to us, and the clock will start counting down as soon as your red light, if you press the right-hand button for the red light to come on, please. Thank you. And you're from the parish council, aren't you?
Right, I'm from the parish council,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
I'm representing my residents in the village. I hope you're all aware that we have a neighbourhood plan for our village, which will shortly go to referendum. We base that plan on extensive research and consultation with our residents. We've proposed and we've allocated land for the kind of housing we need. Small 2 to 3 bedroom houses. The original plan, which was the application on this site, which was approved, we're content with. So this is not a NIMBY moan. This is a serious concern from our residents. There are a number of reasons why we object. Only 2 parking spaces for a 6-bedroom house and no garage. That narrow lane you saw is going to be full of parked cars. More trees being removed. No electric vehicle charging points. The species that live on that site are not going to be protected, and light pollution. But significantly, the flooding implications of building that basement. We've had 6 floods in the period from October to the 20th of December. Each of those floods lasted 3 full days. Elderly residents could not get out of their house through that time. Our residents have been subjected to the misery of water in the centre of the village, really deep water. We've had 4 fire engines called out to rescue people from cars because they couldn't get out. The water was too deep. The roads around the village are narrow country lanes, Bushpit Lane, New Road, are totally wrecked. The surfaces are wrecked. We will not be able to, the County Council will have a huge bill. The 2 issues I want to raise are the Environment Agency and Severn Trent. Your report from the Environment Agency arrived on the 8th of January, and it was a very short report saying, oh, there's no issue. We had a meeting with people far senior to the person who wrote that report on the 17th of January, and they are now putting in flood alert systems for us. We've got volunteer flood wardens, and the Environment Agency have accepted that Colston Bassett is a real problem for flooding. Severn Trent have also done some initial investigations. They found that School Lane just does not have any surface water drains. They should be there, they're on the plans, and they can't find them. All of the surface water goes down School Lane and into the centre of the village. The County Council quite rightly say there's no problem with river flooding. There isn't a problem with river flooding, it's surface water. BSP, I've got to challenge this report as well. They reference groundwater susceptibility database. The British Geological Survey says this should not be used to inform planning decisions at site scale. It's inadmissible evidence, and you really need to take account of that. We don't want to make the situation in Colston Bassett any worse, and I think you, as representatives of us, don't want to do that as well. We've had very little help from anyone in sorting out this problem. There's still a tremendous way to go. I think introducing a huge basement excavation in that area is going to cause groundwater displacement and is going to add to our flooding problems. I'd urge you really to take this situation seriously. You don't have to approve this application, unlike some of the others you mentioned. You would only add to the misery of our residents if you let it go through. So I'm really appealing to you to take on board the fact that these agencies do not know or understand what's going on, and the Environment Agency have now admitted that we do have a problem and are taking action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs McClurk, and that's just in your 5 minutes as well, so thank you.
I'll pass this around because it's only fair.
We fall into all sorts of legal planning. No, I'm sorry, I'll get into terrible trouble. But I would confirm that we have received your email, which had photographs.
Well, thank you.
Right, so, well, certainly I have, and I assume everyone else has received emails from the parish council with right, our next speaker on this then, please, is the ward member, who is Councillor Cumberlack, please.
Shall I switch this off before I switch it on?
The myth is, I mean, you may be the impression that that is somehow miraculously linked into the clock on here. Well, it's not. What happens is, as soon as the red light comes on here, Mrs. Sewell presses a button on the laptop, which counts the clock down. Sorry, I've given a secret away. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yes, so as soon as you're ready, you can start.
I thank Josie for her remarks, and I'm afraid I may well be repeating some of them. I must point out to members that the officer response to my late rep ignores the fact that the report mentioned with the application would have been produced before the severe recent flooding events, and consequently there is a belated research by Severn and Trent, the Drainage Board, ENV and NCC. The BSP flooding report referred to only suggests there would be no groundwater flooding risk, being at the lower end of the spectrum. This is from the British Geological Survey data, which says the susceptibility data should not be used on its own to make planning decisions and cannot be used on its own to indicate, or not, risks of groundwater flooding. It goes on to say, due to underlying soil composition, it is unlikely there will be a consistent rise in water table. This would appear contrary to the 6 flooding incidents in 6 recent weeks. No doubt members have seen the photos of abandoned cars on TV news reports and in photos submitted. At a meeting on the 16th of December, it was reported the water table was still high. The BSP report says this displaced water from School Lane is not a problem as it drains into the Smite. It was the Smite which rose on the 6 recent occasions, contributing to flooding on the approach to Colston Bassett and compounding drainage issues at Bunnison Lane. Therefore, any further displacement of water, coupled with unaddressed drainage and gully issues, adds to flood risk. Flooding in the area is well explained in documents forwarded to committee members and council, outlining the ongoing consultations with Severn and Trent, the drainage boards, county councillors, lead local flood authority, the Environment Agency. Consultation comments in the planning report were written before further investigations into the Colston flooding. They've been alluded to the new stance taken by the Environment Agency as late as 17th of January. Historically, School Lane has flooded from rises in levels of the Smite, and local drainage issues, given these recent events, this has to be a very material consideration. Traditional cellars in the area are of porous brick, allowing water ingress and some egress. Modern methods of tanking mean water is displaced and adds to flood risk. Please note the property opposite the site has a cellar which flooded during recent events. At a meeting on the 7th of February attended by 30+ residents, councillors and local MP Ruth Edwards, it was reported that both the front and rear of the Martins Arms, adjacent to this site, floods. Water drains down School Lane to add to that around the church, where 13 vehicles were stranded. Trent Valley Drainage Board, it appears, would need notifying if displacement of water was to potentially increase runoff rates from new development. The Colston Bassett Neighbourhood Plan states at Policy EMV 7, new development will be required to demonstrate that the site is safe from flooding and does not increase the risk of flooding to third parties, taking climate change projections into account. This policy was favourably commented upon by the Plan Inspector. Potential for flooding should not be taken lightly until drainage and flooding issues are resolved in Colston. It would be foolhardy to allow basement development. This application should be deferred till such time as flooding issues have been resolved. Talks are now underway between the relevant agencies. Or a condition should be included in any decision stating the basement element is not commenced till flooding issues have been satisfactorily resolved. Or the conclusive answer will be to reject this application. Regarding light spillage, whilst the most heavily glazed contemporary areas to the rear of the property, this will be very visible from Hall Lane and the approach into the village. The applicant refers to houses on Hall Grounds Drive with similar or more glazed areas being approved. This does not imply a precedent. The amount of light spillage on Hall Grounds Drive has caused concern,
and only exemplifies the problem of light pollution and harm caused to the conservation area. Colston Bassett is a relatively unlit village and home to many nocturnal creatures attracted to the wooded habitat and water meadows around the Smite. Therefore, it's in direct contravention of policy ENV8 of the neighbourhood plan. Further, policy D1 of the NP requires 3 parking spaces for dwellings of 4 or more bedrooms, again contravened by the provision of only 2 for a 6-bedroom property. Given these contraventions and serious flooding issues, this application should be refused. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cumberlack, and well within 5 minutes again. So we don't have any further speakers on this item. So would you like to pick up on any items on this, Mr. Taylor, please?
I think, Chairman, I was going to take this one.
Oh,
sorry, yes, yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, yeah.
Chairman, just to the flooding issue was mentioned by both speakers. Is a very emotive subject. I think we've had it at least on 3 items this evening. And I will admit I sat in my lounge on Sunday when the cloud burst and I thought, we've got a planning committee this week, haven't we? Chairman, the neighbourhood plan is emerging. It's gathering weight as it goes through the process. It's not yet adopted, so it doesn't form part of the development plan, but is a material planning consideration. As I understand it, the Colston Bassett neighbourhood plan does allocate sites for development. However, that does not preclude other sites coming forward, and my reading of the plan is it certainly lends support for dwellings of 3 or fewer bedrooms. There's not a policy which, in my opinion, Chairman, precludes or objects to larger dwellings such as this. Obviously, we have already approved a dwelling on this site. The main difference really in this, there's some changes to size, and the main difference, which is, I think, exercising concern, is the inclusion of the basement and the potential impact that might have on groundwater flows. Chairman, I did check with, we clarified this point in your late representations on page 9. It does talk in the flood risk assessment that any subterranean groundwater will travel towards the River Smite. I sought clarification whether that was current situation or proposed to direct surface water from this development to the River Smite. The response I got was that is the current situation. This property is clearly on higher ground. Gravity being what it is means that the water will flow downhill to the River Smite. The question is, therefore, and I made the point earlier, no more rain is going to fall on this site. The question really that members perhaps need to consider in determining this application is whether that basement will have a significant impact on the behaviour of that water flow. I did have a conversation with someone at the Lead Local Flood Authority. Their view was, given the size of the site and the limited proportion of the site that basement forms, it would not have a significant impact. Chairman, I've also had benefit of sight of some of the correspondence that you've received and the correspondence from the person from Severn Trent who attended the meeting with the parish council and the ward councillor. My reading of this, Chairman, a bit like the concern that was raised earlier on another application, was that part of the issue with flooding in Colston Bassett is because certain pipes have collapsed, are not functioning, or that watercourses have become silted up. And I understand that those are the measures that they are seeking now to address. In summary, Chairman, I don't believe that a single dwelling on this site, which is actually in flood zone 1, and yes, as I said earlier, we still have to consider the impact of flooding in the wider area. We don't believe, based on the advice that we've had, that the proposal would have a significant impact on that flooding. There certainly seems to be other reasons that or causes that are causing that flooding and need to be alleviated. But in terms of this particular application, Chairman, I don't believe it would be a justified reason for refusal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask for a clarification? Because as it says in the site history, and as we've heard, there is a long history to this site with various applications, refusals and permissions given, so on and so forth. Now, as it stands at the moment, there is permission in place that was granted in last year now, 2019, 00167/FUL, but then another application was put in after that that was refused. So does that mean that 167/FUL is still a live application? is still valid and still in place?
Yes, Chairman, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification on that. Oh, sorry, yes.
Just one further point. In terms of the parking, they show a drive with quite a generous forecourt in front. They only show 2 cars sat on that drive, which seems to suggest there's only 2 parking spaces, but arguably that forecourt could accommodate more cars, Chairman.
Okay, right. Thank you for that. So, Councillor Purdue-Horan is the first name on my thing here. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I read the report very carefully, and I have to say I was quite agnostic initially when I read it, but I've since read late comments and letters. But we've sat here this evening, and some of us, perhaps all of us, have voted for some of the applications through gritted teeth, as it was suggested that because there's been previous allocations provided. Sometimes I wonder whether do we really need to turn up, just tick a box. But what I've heard this evening was 2 extremely powerful and eloquent contributions which precisely assist this committee to make important decisions as we weigh the advantages and disadvantages and pros and cons. This site is not a strategic allocation. It hasn't been through the local development framework group. It is just a single site. But clearly, what has not been answered to my satisfaction in paragraphs 17, 18 and 19 is those that may wish to comment on water matters almost pass the buck. The County Council, as lead local flood authority, almost say this is too small an application for us to be bothered with. And the Environment Agency and the Trent Valley Internal Drainage Board just pass it on to the County Council. I've become aware that there have been discussions between 2 agencies, which I think is pretty crucial to this committee to provide further robust and substantial information in detail. And until we get that information, I think, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we reject this approval.
For the reasons that you have just summarised, because if you're going to move a recommendation to go against the recommendation, you will need to be prepared to have the reasons.
There's been insufficient information from relevant experts that we do rely on.
Right. Okay. Well, keep that thought there. Do you have a seconder at this stage for that proposal? No. Okay. Before we get to that stage, who else would like to talk on this item? Councillor Thomas, did you want to say something, or were you going to tell me what you're going to do?
I would be prepared to second the motion to reject the application, but I have some additional material considerations apart from the fact that the flood risk worsening has not been proved, which I think is the situation that we're in, which is required to be by the policy in the neighbourhood plan. The additional material considerations are that the elevation to the street is inappropriate design for the conservation area. Compared to the approved plan, there is more glazing on the front, and there's an extra panel on that large glazed item in the middle, basically. The second extra material consideration is the light pollution from both that glazed element in the front and from the light well at the rear, which is contrary to policy ENV 8 of the neighbourhood plan, which is not emerging. It has been examined, so it's at a later stage, I would say, than emerging. And the third additional material consideration is the parking spaces. According to the plans that we've been given, there's insufficient parking given for the size of the house, and there is limited on-street parking. So I would second the proposal, the move to reject the proposal with those additional material considerations.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very clear. So we've got a proposer and a seconder for refusal for the reasons given, which involve the concerns on the flooding, but also the other points that Councillor Thomas has just raised. So we've got a motion in place, haven't we? So does anyone else want to say anything at this stage, or shall we? Oh, sorry, Mr.
After you.
Oh, well, I was just going to say I was just asking if anyone else has wanted to speak at this stage, or if we're ready to go to a decision. But did you want to just?
Chairman, I just wanted to clarify the reason. Well, clearly, firstly, Councillor Thomas has put forward additional reasons for refusal, which we will need an indication from the person who moved the application that they are in agreement with those additional reasons.
So, Councillor Purdue-Horan, you moved the initial recommendation to refuse primarily on the flooding concerns. Councillor Thomas came in with some other reasons. Are you happy with those other reasons that to add to your proposal?
It's like, Mr. Chairman, I had a lump of clay, and Councillor Thomas has turned it into a sculpture. So yes, I absolutely agree.
I think we've got that, Mr. Pegram. Is anything else you want to ask on those?
Chairman, yes, if I can just clarify and advise on the first reason for refusal, because as I understood it, the motion that Councillor Purdue-Horan put forward was on the basis that he had insufficient information from the experts to make a decision on this. Insufficient information from a consultee would not be not be a sound reason to refuse the application on. What you must do as decision makers, Chairman, on the information you have before you, is determine whether or not you believe that this development will give rise to an unacceptable risk of flooding to the wider area. Not that you haven't got the information from the consultees. I would clarify on this point that single dwellings, no, we wouldn't normally consult the lead local flood authority. They're not interested, as you put, in development of this scale. They have standing advice and things like that we would then apply. We went to them specifically because this issue was being raised as a concern. So we have consulted them. They have provided their comments. Just for clarity and members' information who are newish to the committee now, all of the flood risk issues used to sit under the Environment Agency. Now it's been split. Environment Agency deal with river and sea flooding. Lead Local Flood Authority deal with surface water drainage flooding, and the drainage boards deal with local drainage ditches and things. But Chairman, my advice to you, is I'm saying that you cannot refuse it on insufficient information from the consultee. You must determine as the decision makers whether you believe on the information you have available there is an unacceptable flood risk presented by this development.
Can I come back?
Yes, please. Yeah, come back on that, please.
Yeah, I think my main point, Mr. Chairman, is that I understand there's ongoing discussions with other agencies, which I think is relevant to perhaps this application. We have heard the awful situation that the village found itself in over the last few months. We don't want to add to that unnecessarily. And if there is a possibility of more robust, detailed information from such discussions, it would certainly help this committee to be more confident in a future decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brennan, you wanted to come in on
Yes, thank you. I have a lot of sympathy with the views expressed with regard to the flooding in the village. For me, from the information that we have available, the case doesn't seem to be made, nor is the case rejected. So is another option, because I do worry that we get to the point where nobody can build a house in a village anymore, even though this is a bit of land that is not being used for anything else. It's former agricultural land. the design of the building, notwithstanding the points that were made about light and so on, is in keeping with the village. It is presumably designed to be a family home. I fear we get pushed into a situation which we cannot now, if it's not in the local plan or in the neighbourhood plan, approve any ad hoc building in our communities, which I don't think is right. However, having said that, I think the jury seems to be out on whether or not the development of a basement is going to exacerbate and add to the problems clearly that the village is already suffering. So is there an opportunity for the applicant to be invited to defer this until the outcome of all of these investigations, which I understand from Councillor Comberlack are ongoing, are resolved and a more definitive position can be established as to whether this is a flood risk or not?
I think the answer to that is you can't defer. You've either got to say yeah or is that right?
Chairman, we can't ask the applicant to defer. You are the decision makers in this room this evening, and you must come to a resolution what you wish to do with this application. We haven't, in recent history, as far as I can remember, ever deferred an application. We have made a decision on the night. To some extent, if the flooding issue and the issues that are under investigation currently was the only reason for refusal, then I might reluctantly be tempted to suggest that members resolve to defer the application pending the outcome of those investigations. My concern, Chairman, is that Councillor Thomas has raised an additional 3, I think, reasons for refusal, and even if you defer it and you get a satisfactory response to the surface water flooding issue, you are still left potentially then with a development that well, I don't know yet because you haven't taken the vote, but you potentially consider to be unacceptable.
So in some respects then, as we stand at the moment, we're talking about too many reasons for...
well, do you want me to go? Well,
no. Okay, right.
You can't have two...
No.
Chairman, you can't have too many reasons. I have advised members on the robustness of their reasons before at this committee. There are some untested waters, if I can use the pun. There is I can't remember, I do apologise, Chairman, I cannot remember, I apologise to the Parish Council, I cannot remember specifically what the policy about light pollution relates specifically to. I know that there is a general concern in Colston Bassett about light pollution, and I often have discussions with the ward councillor about the impact of large areas of glazing. To date, we've never refused an application. Light pollution, to my mind, is more about external light sources rather than the light that shines out of buildings. And on the other point, just to clarify Councillor Thomas's point and not to try and aggravate anyone, a neighbourhood plan is emerging until the point it is adopted.
Quite far emerged, though.
It's well along the track, and I will acknowledge that, yes. And it now carries much greater weight than when it was first published.
Mrs. Sewell. We're just going to get some clarification from the Borough Solicitor on this.
Just to confirm, the consultees have been consulted based on the application that's before committee this evening, and the information that's in the report is the information that they have come back with in relation to this application that you're considering. So they have looked at it as it is and as you're being asked to determine tonight. So the information before the committee is their representation on this application.
Thank you for that clarification. Right, as Mr. Pegram and others have said, we are here to make a decision tonight, and so I think we need to make a decision one way or the other. Would you agree? Right. We've had a proposal moved and seconded for refusing permission for various reasons.
Chairman, before you take the vote, can I just clarify on that point? I did advise members that you couldn't refuse on lack of information from a consultee. If members believe that this development and the inclusion of the basement would result in an unacceptable risk or increase in risk of flooding in the area, that would be the reason for refusal, not the lack of information from a consultee.
Right.
Sorry, I wasn't going to speak on this, and I will be abstaining because of the way I voted the rest of the evening. We have, on the large, big applications tonight, accepted the arguments from the Environment Agency and so on, despite well-argued disputes with them. And here tonight, on this one, we're going to reject that same advice, and I just don't think it would be inconsistent. So I will be abstaining.
Do remember that every application, whether it's a single household application or a big application, is discussed on its own individual pluses and minuses. You can't start comparing one application with another. And also, it's very, I'm not saying you can't, but it's very unusual to abstain in what is in effect a quasi-judicial committee. So you're either for something or you're against something. But that's just the way it is. So right, I think we better go to a decision on this, haven't we? So because otherwise we're going to get. I think there's no more to say on it. So we've got the recommendation moved and seconded to refuse permission. Can I have a show of hands in favour of that recommendation to refuse? Please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So that's 4. Anyone against that recommendation? Please show. That's 7. Any abstentions? No. I just have to ask because you referred to it. So that was 4 against the recommendation and 7 in favour.
Yeah.
4 against. It's 4 to 7. So that motion is lost. Right. So do we now know? So we're in a position now where we need to have a mover and a seconder for an alternative motion, please. Or back to the original substantive, to the original motion in the book. So do I have a proposer or seconder for the recommendation in the report, please?
Yeah, I'm happy
Councillor
to propose
Major?
that we accept the officer's recommendation.
So you're proposing the recommendation. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Verdi, right. So we're now taking a vote on the report, the report as recommendation as in the report. I need to have a show of hands, please. Those in favour of that recommendation, please show. Seven. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. No abstentions. So that means the permission has been passed 7 to 4. Okay, thank you. Very complicated application, and I understand completely the discussion we've had. Now, technically, we're supposed to close this meeting at 10 o'clock, but we are allowed to extend to 10:30 maximum. It's now 20 past 10. We have one more application to go. I am minded to continue with the meeting. Are we all happy to do that? Oh, sorry, what? Oh, we do have to cut. So we have to cut off at 10:30. So even if we're midway through a discussion. So your advice is then we better not go to right.
I'll be brief.
Mr. Taylor says he's going to be brief. We do have I think we have a speaker on this item as well, though. So, yeah. So, Councillor Thomas.
I'm not content to only have 10 minutes to discuss this application.
Right. So, with that in mind, are we minded to defer this application and hold it over, carry it forward to the next meeting? Right. So, it's. Do I need to have a mover and a seconder?
No, it's just a procedural matter.
It's a procedural matter. So that being the case, then this item, this East Leek item, will be the first item on the next committee, which is in whenever it is in March. So we'll close the meeting now. It's 20 past 10. Can I thank you for your contributions? It's been a long meeting, a lot of important, complicated applications. And I think we've given them all a good discussion. Safe journey home. Thank you.